imagining that that really was a band, even though that's not your opinion, to look at the typing results for the substrate control to see if that imaginary band appears there.
Objection vague as to what typing results?
Yes, when we want to look at the substrate control, and if banding did occur in the substrate control, or if any DNA was detected there, then you would want to compare that to your evidence sample.
Okay, and do you recall what your typing results were for stain number 50, one of those Bundy walk stains?
I'll have to look at the report in my notes.
While you're doing that, this imaginary band that you've already described was not there, but where did it line up with respect to the latter?
Your Honor, object to the term imaginary thing argumenta.
Sustain. Rephrase the question.
Imagining that that really was a band, okay, which
Yes.
I'm forcing you to do in this question, where did that band that I've asked you to imagine line up with?
Well, as when Mr. Blazier was, excuse me, asking me, we saw that it was right in between the, I believe it was the 17. But let me look at my notes again to be sure of that. Mr. Harmon, what gel number was it? Analytical gel number?
So 184?
184 is what I've written down.
Thank you. The evidence sample, DNA 20, or I'm sorry, DNA A LAPD number 50 from the Bundy crime scene came back at 2425.
Okay, could we project 275C up, Your Honor? Okay, now if you recall Exhibit 275C, you want to take a look at it? That actually...
Your Honor, I'm going to object. We approach.
Okay, why don't you can turn that off. The bands in that stain were 2425, is that true?
That's correct.
And nothing appeared in the area that the band that I've asked you to imagine appearing in 50 control, is that true?
That's correct.
And even if that band that I've asked you to imagine was on the 50 control, the fact that you see nothing on the 50 stain, what's the significance of that? And I'm asking you to imagine something that's contrary to your scientific opinion.
Well, the only banding pattern that was seen on the evidence sample that relates with that substrate control was a 24 band and a 25 band. There were no bands seen in any other region of that gel. That's it.
Okay, let's move to the proficiency tests that were shown up on the screen by Mr. Blazier. Did you know that the correct answer to the quality control sample on that proficiency test was a 1.13?
No, I did not. These are blind, or they're unknown to me. The results are unknown to me when I'm doing the analysis.
Did you make up the explanation of cross-hybridization for describing in your notes on the result sheet what you saw in that QC result?
No, cross-hybridization is documented in a lot of the literature.
Is it listed in the manufacturer's user guide on page 6-5?
Yes, it is noted in the Roche user's guide.
Okay, is it also mentioned in Dr. Blake's casework article, The Phenomenon of Cross-Hybridization, on page 704?
Dr. Blake does mention cross-hybridization in his 1992 casework paper. As far as the exact page, you'd have to show me the document.
And moving to the test sample and in your proficiency test, when you wrote down what your opinion was when you saw the data, did you know that the correct answer was 1.23?
No, I did not.
Mr. Blazer put up the gel where the 3 reference samples were initially run, and you described that you were unable to type Mr. Simpson. Do you recall that yesterday?
Yes. Mr. Simpson's sample gave no results on the first amplification.
Okay, and your explanation for that was PCR inhibition. Do you recall that?
Correct.
Did you make up the explanation inhibition to explain that?
No, I did not.
Is the subject of inhibition, PCR inhibition, mentioned in the user guide by the manufacturer of these kits?
Yes, it is.
Is it also mentioned in Dr. Blake's casework article on page 719?
Yes, Dr. Blake does mention it. As far as the exact page, I would have to look at the document.
Is it also mentioned in the chapter 17 that was authored by Dr. Blake and Cecilia von Berelding on page 214, the subject of PCR inhibition?
Chapter 17 of the PCR technology book?
Yes.
Yes, it's addressed, inhibition is addressed in that article also.
Is it also addressed in the analytical chemical article that we've discussed, authored by Dr. Blake and Becky Reynolds from Roche?
The article by Dr. Blake and Dr. Reynolds does mention inhibition also.
And is also discussed in a chapter in a book, the Saperstein book, the way we've described it, the authors of which are Dr. Blake and Dr. Sensabaugh, the subject of PCR inhibition.
Well, Saperstein has 3 books out, and in the 3rd edition, there's a chapter devoted to, the chapter I believe you're referring to is PCR, devoted to PCR, and there is mention of inhibition in that chapter.
And is there also an article by Dr. Blake?
Excuse me, Counsel, aren't we getting cumulative at this point?
It's my last article, Your Honor.
All right. Last one.
It was the phenomenon documented by Dr. Blake and Mr. Higuchi, who's also, or Dr. Higuchi, who's also from Roche, in a 1989 symposium paper that was published in the FBI symposium. You want to take a look at that one?
Yes, can I take a look at that?
The name of the article is PCR Inhibition in Bloodstains.
Yes, I recognize this article, and it does discuss inhibition in this article also.
And when faced with the prospect of PCR inhibition or strike that, do all of these articles also discuss what you do when you think there's PCR inhibition?
Yes, if inhibition occurs with the sample, and by inhibition you don't get any typing results, no products obtained from that sample, analysis should be reconducted to try to get a result from that sample. And it could be reconducted by either diluting the sample out and then reamplifying it.
Okay, and is that what you did?
Yes, I did.
And in your opinion, is that what any responsible forensic scientist would do?
Yes.
Okay, now did you see, do you remember Mr. Blazer showed those graphics, one about the glove and that purported to show the locations of stains where the 25 allele were found? Do you recall that yesterday?
Yes, I do.
Could we put that up on the screen, Your Honor?
All right, this is the defense exhibit.
1173C.
All right. Okay, have you had a chance to look at that?
Yes.
And are you familiar with the sampling of the glove and the relationship of the stains that were typed by you and Mr. Sims that produced that detected the 25 allele?
Yes, I've reviewed some photographs.
Is that slide misleading in terms of the location of the stains?
Objection.
Sustained.
How,
Further question.
how misleading is that slide with respect to showing where those stains
Counsel.
actually are?
Counsel. Rephrase the question.
Does that slide accurately reflect the location of the stains which produced the 25 allele?
Well, I think the best depiction would be to see the actual photograph, to see,
Objection, not responsive.
Oh, well,
Why is that?
because that's the actual documentation of this item.
Okay. Would you like to do that, please? Good. We'll put the boards up. You just stay right where you are. A and B, Your Honor, the exhibit numbers. Montgomery, I want you to look at the slide again. From looking at that, can you tell whether that's a right-hand glove or a left-hand glove?
I believe it could be either glove, depending on the orientation of the hand.
Okay, would you look at 272B, the photo board, and if you could, take the pointer and show us where those stains really are on that right-hand glove, number 9 from Rockingham.
Objection, argument.
Sustained. Rephrase the question. And Mr. Harmon, how about if we take that board and put it on the main easel? You can put it on top of the results board
Okay,
because it's the height of that exhibit in that location.
sure. I just
Such
wanted
a-
to have them both together. That's fine.
All right, rephrase the question, please.
Okay, would you point out to the jury where the stains which produce the 25 allele are? Or where they were?
Once again, just by looking at my notes to get the exact item numbers. A 25 allele was detected on G10. And there was also a 25 on...
Okay, and just, because these are inside-out photos, 2 of them, and one is right-side out, could you make it real clear what surface that's on and where it is? Just describe it in words, please.
Okay, G10 is the inside surface near this rich wrist notch. And the results of G10 were a 24 allele and a weaker 25 allele.
Okay, next stain.
There was also a 25 allele detected at G11, and G11 is the outside palmar surface of the glove. And what was detected here was a 24 allele and a weaker 25 and 18 alleles.
Okay,
On G13, which is also the outside surface of the glove, there was, near the notch area, There was a 24 allele detected, and also weaker 25 and 18 alleles detected in this region.
Okay, thanks, Ms. Montgomery. You can go back and have your seat. Mr. Blazer asked you about a problem you had with one of the glove gels. Do you recall that, with the ladder leaking?
Yes, I do.
And your solution to that was to rerun the test, is that right?
Yes. Anytime I'm not confident with the results, or if there's any question in the results, I will do a reanalysis on those samples.
And in fact, did you get the same answers when you reran that gel that you did on the gel where the ladder leaked into the lane?
Yes, for the evidence samples and the controls, I obtained the same results.
And is that what a responsible forensic scientist would do when faced with that problem?
Well, I think any individual, when there's a question, needs to do reanalysis on samples.
And Mr. Blazer projected AG 295 up there, the rear gate gel. Do you recall that yesterday?
Yes, I do.
Okay, and in your opinion, you described what was on there that he directed your attention to as not a problem. Is that true?
Could you state specifically what the problem he addressed on that gel was?
Ms. Montgomery, why don't you pull the microphone a little closer to that?
Sure.
Thank you.
You know, I don't really recall. We heard about a lot of problems yesterday. Do you recall that there was a problem, perhaps a band, a line of bands that went all the way across the gel, or a line of shadows that went across the gel?
Well, I'll look at that gel and see if that's the one that had the silver smearing across the bottom region. And this is a beautiful gel. I don't know what problem could have been mentioned in this.
If there had been a problem, could any responsible forensic scientist have rerun it?
Yes, if a problem was detected, the gel should be rerun.
Okay, but you saw no reason to do that in this case, is that correct?
That's correct.
There was a lot of discussion yesterday about terms that you've used to communicate data that you saw. A hint, a trace, possible trace. Do you recall those discussions?
Yes.
Do the words that you use to try to communicate or convey the data, do they somehow change the data?
No, they don't.
So the data is what you've shown this jury, is that correct?
That's correct.
And the words are words you've used to try to express that so that they can appreciate it?
Correct.
Mr. Blazer asked you some words about examiner bias yesterday, or some questions about examiner bias. Do you recall that?
Yes, I do.
I want to ask you a question about examiner bias. Can you make a 24-25 result look like an 18 by wishful thinking?
No, you can't.
Did anything arise in the course of Mr. Blazer's questioning of you that in any way undermines the results that you and Mr. Sims have presented to this jury?
No, there was nothing.
If a responsible forensic scientist had questions about the results you have presented, could she have performed retesting to address the questions scientifically?
Yes, anytime there's a question, reanalysis can be done on these samples. The ones where there were questions, reanalysis was done.
And could that reanalysis be done using PCR product that you conserve?
Yes.
Could it be done using samples, swatches that you preserve?
Yes.
And could it be used on extracted DNA that you preserved in this case?
Yes, if any extracted DNA remains.
Okay. Thanks, Ms. Montgomery.
All right, Mr. Blazer.
Thank you. Ms. Montgomery, yesterday before lunch, or at lunch, I gave you every picture that I was going to use, didn't I?
Yes, you did.
And I told you to look at them and compare them to your gels, didn't I?
Yes, you did.
And I told you to look at them and compare them to the originals of your gels, not the blue films, right?
I don't recall if you specifically said to compare them to the originals or the copies.
You didn't have the blue films, did you? They were in evidence.
Oh, no, I make multiple copies of the blue film, or of the gel, both for discovery purposes and also to retain copies for the case files.
And I told you that I wanted you to look at them carefully to make sure that they were accurate pictures, that they accurately portrayed what you have on your films, didn't I?
Objection, that's irrelevant, cost per hearsay.
Overruled.
Yes, you asked me to look at those photos and see how they compared to the gels I had, or the copies.
I'm sorry. And you came back after lunch and you handed my pictures back to me and you said, these are great. I wish we had some of these, didn't you?
We're talking about the computer, not the photos.
Sustain.
It's irrelevant.
You came back and told me these pictures are fine, didn't you?
Objection, it's irrelevant, cost per hearsay.
Overruled. That's not irrelevant.
Actually, the photos, they're, as far as showing the ladders and what the samples are and the strong bands, they were excellent photos. As far as the weaker bands, you need to actually see the gel to be able to capture the weaker gels and to be able to visualize them with your eyes.
Move to strike is non-responsive.
Overruled.
Did you tell me any of that yesterday after lunch?
I told you parts of that, yes.
And I told you that for any picture that I showed, if you wanted to look at your original gel, you should tell me so, right?
I don't recall if you said that or not.
Didn't I say that in front of the jury here? Do you remember that?
I don't remember hearing it, but you may have said it.
And the two films that we sent, that we showed to the jury, were your films, not my pictures, correct?
That's correct.
Now I want to show you I want to show you 275I, which is the film with the dress samples on it, correct?
Objection, it's beyond the scope.
Overruled.
Okay.
And I put a Post-it on there with arrows above the two bands that you say are there at 24, correct?
That's correct.
And let me show you the substrate control that Mr. Harmon asked you about, which is 275Q. The band in the substrate control lane, have I put a Post-it with an arrow above the band that you say isn't a band?
Objection, it's argumentative, it's convoluted.
Overruled.
Well, the band that you say isn't a band, but it's not a band. That's why I say it isn't a band. This is one where we were talking about it yesterday, where there's this little glitch in the gel. And if we could pass it around to the jury for them to look at, that would probably help.
You see something there that looks like a band?
No, I don't. I see an artifact in between these two lanes.
You see an artifact that looks like a band.
No, it does not look like a band.
You can see something there that looks like a band, and you can't see, what you can see on the dress is much fainter than what you see on the substrate control, correct?
No, that's incorrect. This is not a band. And it's not a band because it's not a distinct banding pattern. It also falls within two lanes, and you could tell it's just I don't know how else to describe it besides a blip, but if you could show it to the jury, I think that would help.
Yeah, I like to put these on the Elmo side by side if it's good.
All right.
Let's try one at a time. We can't fit them both on here. Let's try 275Q, the substrate control first. Can you zoom in on it?
Would it be okay if I went to the podium?
Well, let's see how it projects first on the monitor.
Oops, that's upside down.
All right. Can you see the area right below where my post-it says no band?
Yes, I do.
And that's what you're saying is not a band.
That's correct.
Now let's look at the dress. Now, you see that area? You're
Yes,
calling
I-
those two bands, aren't you?
Excuse me?
You interpreted those as being two bands there, didn't you?
Could you put it into real life
Pick it up.
instead of magnified? Yes, and as when I was talking, or when Mr. Harmon was presenting the gels, I'm asking me to explain some of the fainter ones. I was saying that it's difficult to see those fainter bands from when they're projected up on the screen, and that you actually have to see them. It's just like slide presentations. Sometimes you lose some of the contrast when you put something on an overhead such as this.
Eric, will you pass these to the jury?
Yes.
Number 7?
No, you need to talk to the attorneys.
Mr. Blazier, I think it's best.
Hold
I
on,
don't-
there's no question pending.
Eric, can we also have a white sheet of paper, makes it a little easier to see?
No, they have their jurors' notebooks. would you collect those items from Deputy Russell? All right, thank you, counsel. Proceed.
Ms. McCarthy, these slides that we just showed the jury, this is what you submitted to the court as evidence of your testing, correct?
Do those have the evidence labels on them?
I'm sorry? The two that have the labels.
Yes, those are the two.
Now, cross-hybridization. I want to ask you a couple of questions about what Mr. Harmon asked you. Under what conditions do you get cross-hybridization so that you have a 1.3 dot show up?
Cross-hybridization can occur when there's a slight difference in the temperature of the stringency wash during the typing process of the DQ alpha. And I believe Dr. Cotton may have gone into this in a bit more detail. And if the temperature is slightly off, then you could get some of this weak dot, some of the weak dots occurring within the sample.
There are controls built into the system so that you don't have temperatures too low, correct?
Well, we calibrate our water bath and we check it with a thermometer. But sometimes if the water level's not high enough, then you could have a subtle or a slight difference in the temperature from between where the strips are and to where the water level ends and then where the top of the tray is.
What does the Amplitype User's Guide say with respect to cross-hybridization and when it can occur in terms of how much DNA you have to test?
The user's manual, actually, if I could refer to that.
We refer you to section 6.2.3.
Yes, they talk about cross-hybridization and how it can occur when when you develop your strips for too long or too much DNA is added into too much DNA is amplified. And these are two other ways that cross-hybridization can occur.
Does the manual say that it can occur when you develop your pictures properly and don't use too much DNA?
When you develop your pictures properly?
Well, let's talk about one of those at a time. If
That's
you use the
question.
appropriate, I'm sorry, if you use the appropriate quantity of DNA, you shouldn't get that, right?
No, that's not what this says.
Well, why don't you read it to us?
Would you like me to read the whole paragraph to you?
Yes.
Okay. It's section 6.2.3 of the Amplitype User's Guide put out by Roche. There's a Cetus emblem because Cetus was the original company and it was bought out by Roche. And in the supporting material section 6-5, it talks about typing of large amounts of amplified DNA. It's a long paragraph.
Go ahead.
Amplification of samples containing high levels of starting DNA, parenthetically, greater than 30 nanograms, generally results in large quantities of amplified DNA. Hybridization of very high concentrations of amplified DNA to the probe strips can sometimes lead to the detection of faint background signals, much weaker than the CDOT, which is due to non-specific, quote, cross-hybridization, unquote. Cross-hybridization in this context refers to the weak interaction of a probe with a DQ alpha sequence, allele, that is not perfectly complementary. This occurs more with the subtyping probes than with the typing probes, because the subtyping probes detect differences between the alleles of only one or two bases. That's only halfway through. The extent of cross-hybridization, even with very high levels of amplified DNA, is so low that any faint background signals only appear after lengthy color development. These nonspecific signals do not appear if the color development reaction is stopped with a degree of coloration of the specific dots appears to have reached a maximum.
You can stop there if you like, unless you want to read the rest.
Yeah, I think we should read the
Okay.
rest. Some samples having very large quantities of amplified DNA require only 5 to 10 minutes for maximum coloration. And our laboratory, we develop between 20 and 30 minutes. Development of color beyond this point, overdevelopment, can also lead to high strip background, which decreases contrast. And that's one thing our laboratory, Dr. Blake has noted that we should stop our color development a little earlier than we do.
Mr. Harmon told you to use Dr. Blake's name as many times as you could, didn't he?
He did not tell me to use Dr. Blake's
No,
name as
he
many
didn't tell.
times.
So the manual tells you that you shouldn't get these dots if you develop your film the appropriate amount of time, doesn't it?
Well, it's not film. What we're talking about are strips, and those are the membranes, the thin membranes that had the dots on them, the 1 dot, the 2 dot, the 3 dot. So we're referring to strips, not film.
The manual says that you only get that phenomenon when you develop it for too long, correct?
What that says, the manual says that's one reason why you can get that.
Does it give any, and it also says you have to have a high molecular weight of DNA before you see that phenomenon too, right?
No, it said that a high level of DNA. And
Was
that's
that-
one way that cross-hybridization can occur.
High level means a lot of DNA, doesn't it?
Yes, it does.
And in the mixed samples in this case, you had very low levels of DNA, didn't you?
That's correct.
Now, does it describe any other way you get cross-hybridization in here other than those 2 ways?
Not in that particular manual.
And this is put out by the manufacturer of the kit.
That's correct.
Now, Dr. Blake's article on casework analysis, would you agree that that says that you don't get cross-hybridization unless the temperature is too low, 54 degrees rather than 55?
Yes, I believe the casework, the article he's referring to, it's the 1992 publication by Dr. Blake and some other individuals, states that with changes in the temperature that cross-hybridization can occur.
Now, let's assume hypothetically that you can get cross-hybridization at lower levels of DNA. Would you agree that what that results in is giving you 1.3 dots that really aren't there? I'm sorry, that don't represent any DNA?
Well, I think we need to remember that these dots are very faint and they're not interpreted as part of the results. These 1-3s are outlines or hints. If it's anything substantial and there's a question, then reanalysis should be conducted.
So these are the hints as opposed to the possible traces.
Well, you're bringing possible trace into the way the D1S80 is described. The hint as opposed to a trace. If it's trace, then you want to re-examine those samples.
Now, when you have a trace, you want to re-examine them?
Yes, one should re-examine if there's a trace amount.
We have the efficiency test. Let me show you Defense 1172A in yellow. Now, you recall, Ms. Montgomery, that this is the second time that you ran these proficiency samples, correct? I'm sorry, that's the first time.
Yes, that's the first analysis.
And you got 1 hint and 1 trace. You got a hint in QC839 and a trace in the positive control, correct?
That's correct.
So you did it again. Would that be the reason why you did it again?
No, I don't believe that's the reason why I did it again. I would need to see that whole case file to determine why subsequent analysis was done on these samples.
All right, and you got nothing in your evidence samples, the actual proficiency samples, of any hints or traces, did you?
That's correct.
Now let me show you 1172B.
Would you pull the microphone closer?
This is the second time you ran those same samples, isn't it?
That's correct.
And you got 2 traces in your proficiency evidence samples. Didn't you not? Didn't you? Actually, you got 3, didn't you?
Yes, that's true. But if you look at the controls on that strip, the positive control and the QC samples, there is nothing indicated there. And as far as the type that was reported out for these samples, sorry, I can't. On sample 433, the reported result is a 1.2, 3. Those trace amounts in the trace amounts of cross-hybridization were not reported out. They weren't significant to the analysis.
You characterized them as a trace when you read the dots, didn't you?
Yes, that's what I wrote.
And you didn't redo that one, did you?
No, I did not.
And your quality control showed, I think you just indicated the quality control worked fine. That shows 2 hints, doesn't it?
Yes, those are hints or, just a small amount of color developing in those.
And this is a propensity test that you say you got the right answers.
Yes, I did.
Can we have the glove board, please?
Yes. Boards,
Well, actually, let me have to do without that. 1173C, please. PowerPoint. Ms. Montgomery, yesterday when I showed you this, I asked you whether the stains G10, G11, and G13 were in the wrist area, didn't I?
I believe you did, yes.
You said they were.
Yes, they're in the lower portion of the glove.
In the wrist area, aren't they?
I believe that's correct.
So where I have circled is the wrist area, isn't it?
Well, yes, that's the lower level of the glove. One would call it a wrist area.
Okay. Now, the upper area of the glove, is it accurate to say that the various samples that were tested, that Mr. Simpson was excluded from any blood stains on that glove up around the finger area where someone might grab the fingers to take the glove off?
Yes, there were areas in the finger region that were tested, and there was no 25 allele detected in those samples.
And there was Mr. Simpson was excluded from any samples in the palm area where someone's finger might make contact if they were holding it with the other hand.
Well,
That's not an evidence that they were all tested, John.
sustained.
You tested a large number of samples from that glove, didn't you?
Gary Sims examined the glove, and I guess I should note that for G11, it was near the wrist notch. It was termed the outside palmar surface. And as I stated, Mr. Sims looked at all these samples and extracted them, and then I analyzed them for D1S80.
The reason for taking so many samples was to get a representative sample from different parts of the glove, correct?
That would be one reason to test various areas, yes.
And various areas were tested, and Mr. Simpson was excluded from everywhere on that glove except the wrist area, correct?
Well, as I stated, the wrist and near the wrist area.
Ms. Montgomery, have you ever taken a pair of leather gloves off by pulling them off at the wrist?
That's irrelevant.
Have you ever further
Sustained.
questions?
Mr. Harmon?
Keep that there for a second. Come back to that in a second. Could you cut that and then we'll come back to that? I just have a couple of questions, Ms. Montgomery. The cross-hybridization, when you were reading from the user guide, there was something in there that I think needs to be clarified. I believe the exact words were that this cross-hybridization occurs more with the subtyping probes.
Yes, that's correct.
And could you tell the jury, just so they understand what that means? What are the subtyping probes that were used in this case?
Well, the subtyping probes, there are 4 nominal alleles, and this is the 1 allele, the 2 allele, the 3 allele, and the 4 allele. And then there are also subtypes, and that's the 1.1 and the 1.3 and the 1.2, but the 1.2 has to be inferred because there's not a specific probe for that 1.2. So it's more common to see the cross-hybridization occurring with samples of the subtype.
Could we show 1173C? Could you come back here, Ms. Montgomery? Okay, what I'd like you to do is, just so the jury can appreciate what this means and doesn't mean, you know the symbol for circle with a line through?
Yes.
Could you put that over the no genotypes consistent with OJS, please? And maybe we need, is that
Whoops, wrong way. Is that what you'd like?
Yes, and if there's enough room, could you write down below that, let's make this line as thin as possible because they're kind of beefy there, down below, genotypes consistent with defendant, if you can fit that in there. Or just types consistent with defendant.
This is like one of those boards.
Does that make you dizzy?
It's very difficult to write here. How's John Madden do this? Can you read that?
We'll remember what that means. Could we capture that, Your Honor? And I don't know if that's 1173C1, or I'm not sure how we number this one.
This one would be a prosecution exhibit.
Okay. Okay, Ms. Montgomery, we're done with that now.
276.
Could I have 275C back up there? And this is my last few questions of you. Now, Ms. Montgomery, while this is the substrate control, the 50C, at least I'm pretty sure that's the one it is. Or no, that's the, I'm sorry. The gel that had the 50 control on it. It's 275Q. Now, we just need to get back to a little basic here. You put the samples in all the way across the top, and they move in one direction, is that right?
That's correct.
I believe one of the things you said is that whatever that is, it's not a band, is that right?
That's correct.
And one of the reasons it's not a band is that it's not in the lane. Is that true?
All right, that's one of the reasons. I think you'll want to clear the telestrator. Yes, and it doesn't have the definition of a band.
Well, let's just focus on where it is. It's your opinion that it's not in one of those lanes, is that right?
That's correct.
Now, these bands, they're DNA. They're started out, they're DNA material, right?
Correct.
I think we heard amplicons. There's amplicons in there?
Correct.
Hold the microphone closer, please.
Now, can these things move sideways?
No, they're moving down through the gel.
I mean, suppose it was a band full of amplicons from a very willful person. Could they, and they wanted to turn left, could they do that?
No, they do not have control over themselves.
They move in one direction,
That's correct.
in one direction only.
Correct.
Thanks. No further questions, Your Honor.
Mr. Blazer? All right, Ms. Montgomery, thank you very much. You're excused. All right, let me see counsel without the court report, please. record. Mr. Harmon, Mr. Scheck, my understanding is the next witness is Colin Yamauchi, correct? All right, and there's some issues we need to resolve before we get to Mr. Yamauchi.
Yes, Your Honor.
All right, Mr. Harmon. No, let's take the other matter first.
Me first, Your Honor.
You're the one who told me it's going to take a bit, so.
Oh, okay. Actually, it may not. Maybe we need to recap our off-the-record discussion yesterday, because I think it's helpful to see where we started and where we're going to end up with this, Your Honor. Dr. Gerdes has been retained as a defense expert in this case for some time. He's made laboratory visits to LAPD, and I believe in January, in December, he looked at many things in the lab. In January, he photographed many records in the lab that were pursuant to court order and legitimate areas of inquiry by Dr. Gerdes. And as you know, we have consistently requested discovery material to be provided to us by defense experts whom the defense has actually put on their list, which one would assume means they have a reasonable expectation of calling them.
All right, Dr. Gerdes is on the witness list.
Dr. Gerdes has, to my knowledge, has always been on the witness list in this case. And I don't think we've ever gotten anything from him until, just coincidentally, before Mr. Yamauchi was about to hit the stand. We were given 6 pages on May 22nd. I'm not sure what today's date is, so that was just a couple of days ago. And it's a tabulation by Dr. Gerdes of things that he apparently reviewed and photographed and his opinions about them. I'm well acquainted with Dr. Gerdes, and I'm well acquainted of the nature of his observations and evaluations of things, but it would appear that most of these things have nothing to do with Mr. Yamauchi. However, a significant number of them do. My ballpark count was 40 to 50 of these separate items relate to Mr. Yamauchi.
Why don't you give me an example of what these quote-unquote items are?
Well, see, one of the problems is that this is what Dr. Gerdes has seen. This is his version of what he saw, but these are hybridization strips and sheets for PCR typing done by LAPD in general, and many of them, they're not all Mr. Yamauchi, because he's not the only one that does the PCR DQ alpha typing. So it is my understanding that Dr. Gerdes has only seen a hybridization sheet and the strips that are reflected in that hybridization that show the typing results and interpretations and the conclusion of the analyst. These items cover the time period. They go from 93 to 94, which is the time, I think, October 93 to through the latter part of 94. And some of them reflect actual, or yesterday when the subject was broached, Mr. Scheck represented to you that these were LAPD's validation studies, and that's not necessarily true. It's only partially true. And then I believe he corrected it to say, well, it's validation studies and casework. There are two issues here. Are these things relevant? Are the ones that don't affect Mr. Yamauchi at all, where he didn't participate in any of the testing, are they relevant at all? And I'm assuming that absent some specific offer of proof, they're not relevant, particularly when there are things that Mr. Yamauchi may not be familiar with, I mean, you can't make something relevant by asking a person about something they haven't done and then forcing them to look at it and then say, what do you think now, Mr. Yamauchi? There are a number of these things that as I said, 40 to 50 of these strips and sheets that do relate to Mr. Yamauchi. What the court is not aware of is Mr. Yamauchi accepted his first PCR DQ alpha case in October of 1993. When I looked at this, I tried to segregate what Dr. Gerdes claims he saw with those dates, because, you know, that could get relevant if given the right showing or offer of proof. And it would appear that about 18 of these strips, sheets, were after Mr. Yamauchi accepted his first case, and 30 of them are before he accepted his first case. And I provide that to the court to assist the court. Once you hear whatever the offer of proof is, Mr. Scheck alluded to the fact that he was only going to ask a few general questions, and, you know, we might save a lot of time if he specifies what the questions are. There may not be any objection to this. We would welcome Dr. Gerdes coming in and testifying about this. If he couches his testimony correctly, it could be highly relevant, and we're anxious to hear that from him. But cross-examining Mr. Yamauchi about things that may or may not be relevant, most of which have nothing to do with him, I think absent some specific offer of proof would be inappropriate. But Mr. Scheck assured you he only had a few questions. The problem with the few questions are if they're the kinds of questions that open it up to requiring us on redirect to go through each and every one of these, we'll be happy to do that. Clearly, Dr. Gerdes is misinformed on some of the things that he said in here. I'm not misinformed. This is what he does for a living. But I think absent some specific offer of proof, I timed the amount of time just on cross that we spent with Renee Montgomery on her proficiency test. It was about 20 minutes. So if we multiply 20 minutes by 40, we could spend days just showing that Dr. Gerdes' representation or his interpretation of this is at best misguided or misinformed, and we'll be happy to do that. One of the problems is this requires a massive compilation of information. Some of these are actual cases, and we're not even sure that they're pending or not, so there may have to be some redaction to protect the names and identities of parties. So if it's a simple proposition that Mr. Scheck, there's nothing, we're not trying to hide anything, but the way this gets done, I think, is important, and we will do whatever we can to present it fairly. But I think those are the caveats that, absent some specific offer of proof, at this point, it may well be irrelevant. One could imagine Mr. Matheson being cross-examined about each and every conventional serology case that he's ever done. Certainly, that was not requested, and I'm sure you would not have allowed that. And absent a specific offer of proof, you shouldn't allow it in this case either, Your Honor. I believe as well, if there is to be a specific offer of proof about that relates to this material, then I believe the defense should provide us with the additional material that Dr. Gerdes refers to in the 6 pages that he provided us. Somehow, we have been forced into the position, in terms of reciprocal discovery of this case, that defense witnesses who are on the witness list for months and months are somehow shielded from providing material because there's a clear pattern to this, that somehow the defense has been allowed to hold back material because they have convinced you in some way that it would effectively undermine their cross-examination of our witnesses, or in the alternative, that in spite of the fact that they have expressed their clear intention to call these witnesses, that in camera discussions, it is my impression that they have convinced you that even though they've put them on the list, which is a clear manifestation of their intent to call these people, that they have also alternatively told you, well, we're not sure that they're going to testify because we want to see how well we do on cross-examination, and if we give the prosecution the material that we intend to cross-examine their witnesses about, we will not be very effective in our cross-examination. And your court orders clearly reject that proposition, but it's clear that's what's going on in this case, Your Honor. So if there's an offer of proof, I'd like to see the additional material that Dr. Gerdes, where he says, see analysis, discussion for detailed explanation. We don't have that. And you know, honestly, if there is an offer of proof, we'll need to have that. We'll need time to review it so that we can have an intelligent discussion about the materials that have been withheld from us for much, much too long.
Mr. Scheck?
Your Honor, I don't know why these things have to take so long. We had a discussion about this. The record's clear. First, we got some validation studies. We were able to review those strips. Then, in the middle of January, we were able to look at more of these strips. These are Dr. Gerdes' notes. What they reflect in the chart, as Mr. Harmon indicated, is that there are these dot blot strips. At LAPD, they record what they see and what they don't see. This is just a chart where Dr. Gerdes indicates this is what is seen. I say this is a contaminant. They're not a contaminant. Out of an abundance of caution, it struck me that these notes should be turned over. It's not a final report to avoid all this. The bottom line here is that Dr. Gerdes and Mr. Yamauchi sat there and went over these strips one by one. As I indicated to the court yesterday, I have no intention of going through these strips one by one at all with Mr. Yamauchi. The only question I'm going to ask him, and where I think it's relevant, is I'm going to ask him some general questions about whether or not he thinks the LAPD DNA laboratory has a problem with contamination. And we'll hear what he has to say, and we'll accept his answer, and it's not my intention to go through these strips with him one by one in terms of the reading, but I just thought out of an abundance of caution I should give them Dr. Gerdes' notes, which I'm not entirely sure I'm obligated to turn over, but I thought I might as well, just to make it clear to them. And this is something that Dr. Gerdes went over with Mr. Yamauchi and explained that there are two different views, as is coming out in the testimony, as to the meaning of dot intensities and what significance that has, whether they're contaminants or not. That's all. So I'm just going to ask him that one general question that I indicated to you before, or the questions along those lines, and I'm not going to go through each of these strips with him one by one. I have no intention of doing it. So I think it saves us all trouble.
All right, we're going to call Dr. Gerdes to go through them one by one?
That's a different story. Yeah.
All right, then isn't there a... Excuse me, Mr. Harmon.
I'm sorry, I thought you were going to...
Isn't there a comment in the 6 pages of notes that there's an analysis that has been prepared?
Yes, in fact, I think the court saw it, that if the court recalls, there was, we were turned over some but not all of these strips. So what we turned over to Mr. Harmon is an additional analysis of all the additional strips. Initially, we got just some strips, and those comments refer to notes I think the court's seen that are just general characterization summaries of what's on that chart, but not for everything that's on that chart, because he only had validation studies. And then in January got additional casework, and he hasn't done the additional summaries integrating everything else that he has. We'll get that expeditiously, but all the data is there with respect to that. It's just a question of graphing them. But that's what those comments refer to, and I think if the court goes back and looks at the notes, you'll see that's exactly what it is.
And that's already been turned over to the prosecution?
Which part?
The analysis.
The raw data has. The overall analysis of each of those hasn't been done yet. Do you see what I'm saying? In other words, he got some of the data, and the comments that Mr. Harmon is referring to are not his final report, because it doesn't refer to all of the data, it only refers to part of the data. What we gave Mr. Harmon are all of the data, all of his calls. It's just a question of characterizing, adding up, and summarizing it. That's all. It's just a question of making charts. So, but the point is that he's been very busy. We're working with him on charts, and we'll get the charts. But none of this is going to be gone into with Mr.
There's no
Yamaguchi.
report?
No. Not in, how do you define a report? Report would consist of the raw data and the charts. Is there a final report? No, we've indicated to you there's no final report. Was there an interim report based on part of the data? Yeah, and we showed that to you.
Have you shown it to the prosecution?
Excuse me. Mr. Blaserhead. Mr. Blaser, he told you about this, about the interim report that was in draft form, that wasn't a final report. That's what he tells me. Not on all the data we gave him, which we didn't have. So that's all.
Let's address the first issue first. Mr. Harmon, what's your comment on the offer of proof as to the questioning of Mr. Yamauchi?
Well, questioning is questioning. If I have no objection, if that's all he's going to ask, and we don't, and if he doesn't like the answer, get in a huff and go on with other things, or pursue it, that's fine, Your Honor. That's when I heard that yesterday, I thought if we can get a commitment, we could save a lot of time on this. But it's got to be a clear commitment. Otherwise, we have to talk about subject 2 as well, and I'm anxious to do that as well. So, can we move on to that, and maybe Mr. Scheck can craft his questions, and
All right.
That's no problem. But subject 2 relates to that, Your Honor. Can I talk about that?
Sure.
I just want to indicate to the court that the board discussion is going to take some time on one of the boards.
Well, we'll see. Do we have those available, by the way, the boards you can use with Mr. Yamauchi?
If they were here, we left them here, I think. Yes, Your Honor.
All right.
I'm not one to be shocked when I hear that what I knew was going on is really going on, but if I heard correctly, they've had discussions with you. I mean, it's clear by the sequence of the reciprocal discovery requests, and I alluded to this the other day with the cut-up notes that we got about from Bodden and Wolf and Lee, that there's a lot of doctoring going on. And it's clear that this whole manipulation, it's a contrived, perverted attempt to withhold what the voters of this state afforded us, and that's the right to a fair trial.
Well, Mr. Harmon, let's not go down that road. We've had this discussion
Well,
once
we're down
before.
that road,
Wait,
Your Honor.
Don't interrupt me, Mr. Harmon. The problem we have is that the people who crafted this did so inartfully, and they left a lot of loopholes.
Well,
But I'm stuck with it, as are you.
Well, and they rely on judges to realize what it meant, Your Honor. And what it didn't mean was that they would spend time on charts and say, don't write a final report, because once you do that, we've got to turn it over. So let's just spend time at $150 an hour making up charts and things. And so when you walk into court, make sure your report is only dated the day before you walk into court so we can justify withholding it. But I heard Mr. Scheck say that you've reviewed some notes.
No, I haven't reviewed notes. I've been told about notes.
Well, I haven't been told about any notes. None of us have. And somehow, Dr. Gerdes said, see analysis discussion for detailed explanation. It doesn't say the one I haven't written yet. It doesn't say the informal one. It doesn't say the casual one. It says, see it. And we haven't seen it. This is all we saw. It was dated May 22nd. And this is the tip of the iceberg. This is going to happen over and over again because we don't have anything from the defense except cut-up notes. That's all we have. And so I think we need to call a timeout to the proceedings, Your Honor, respectfully, and review all of this material, because we were entitled to have this before the trial began. We
Well,
were
Mr.
entitled
Harmon-
to consider it.
Mr. Harmon, before we get off onto that discussion, if you recollect, I have issued an order regarding all of these experts' reports, ordering them to be disclosed as soon as they're available. I also gave counsel warning that I would be very wary of the subterfuge of telling an expert witness out of their normal practice not to write reports. And I, in fact, cited the one case I was able to find where counsel were sanctioned for that very procedure. So I'm aware of that issue. If it comes to pass that there are reports or that conclusions were reached and there was a deliberate manipulation of the process and instruction to the witnesses not to prepare reports to avoid discovery, then those witnesses will not testify. And that's going to be the sanction. And that was an order that I made early this year.
Well, I think you're in a good position to say, tell Gerdes, have a nice life, but they've sandbagged us with
That's
it.
quite possible.
I think you heard enough today to do that,
That's quite
and I'd be happy to see a judge resort to that, because it's totally within your judgment to do that. And I think what happened today may haunt them, and
It
we will
could.
remind you at every turn that clearly what they told you is they'd rather spend time on their charts than writing a final report. He hasn't gotten any other data since January. I know he's a busy man, but he's not too busy to be making charts for them, but he's too busy to write his final report. So, don't get me wrong, we'd love to have these guys come in. We don't want faceless people's names being injected in here. But to deny us this kind of material so that we can absorb it into our presentation really frustrates the whole purpose behind it, Your Honor. So I think we've seen the tip of the iceberg, and I'm anxious to see the bottom of it, because it's much bigger than any of us appreciate.
Your Honor, I have every confidence that you'll have no problem with this. I'm really restraining myself, because these long diatribes and these attacks and these on what witnesses are going to say or do and the quality of them, I mean, it's just irrelevant.
Well,
I
Mr.
understand the court's
Mr. Scheck,
concern.
I'm a little skeptical for this reason. I expressed this skepticism 2 months ago, that it's hard for me to believe that expert witnesses of the caliber that I've seen on the defense witness list haven't prepared reports. It's hard to believe that counsel could proceed to make opening statements and make certain representations as to what's coming in the defense case without having reports to base those statements on. I'm just telling you, I'm a little skeptical.
I understand what the court, but we've had meetings with the court about it. We'll explain it, and I think that you'll be satisfied. I don't think you'll have any problems with it at all, especially with respect to this, and in terms of Dr. Gerde's data and the charts and what his testimony is going to be in his reports.
But these notes say C analysis.
Yes, and we indicated exactly what that was, an analysis of validation studies. There was additional data that he saw in January after that was repaired that he has to integrate, which he hasn't done yet. And obviously, given the court's concern, we'll have him produce his integration post-haste. But the essence, I think it'll be very clear. The notion of a report, we're talking about looking at dots on a strip, and what you'll see is that there's a principal difference here between those people that believe that certain kinds of manifestations on these strips represent contamination, and those that say we can ignore it. And that's a considerable, that's the principal concern. I think the court's going to see that coming out. It's no big secret to anybody, and it's no big secret to Mr. Yamauchi, because Dr. Gerdes went and said, look at this, look at this, look at this, this is what I think. It's not a secret to Mr. Harmon.
All right, let's see the boards.
The board that I think we should address first, Your Honor, is one that concerns Dr. Lee's examination of the socks. And I have some serious problems with this board for a few reasons. The principal reason is that what it depicts isn't true. And first I'll state the factual background, and then I'll state the legal objection. as the court recalls, the biggest problem that we've had in this case, and one of the most remarkable and unusual aspects of it, is that we're in the middle of trial before the defense is even allowed to examine evidence. And there was a point where the prosecution said that they wanted to send the sock out for EDTA testing to the FBI. And we had been tried, they did not refuse to send the socks to Albany. And then, as the court, I'm sure, distinctly recalls, they said, I interjected, well, can we, they refused to send it to Albany because they were going to send it to the FBI, I believe, for testing on EDTA. And I said in our Chambers conference, well, if we can fly Dr. Lee, if we can we see it in the morning before the courier takes it out to Washington? And you looked at the prosecution and said, well, if they can do that, they can do that. And we managed to find Dr. Lee at Seattle in that American Academy of Forensic Sciences conferences. We called him at 1 in the morning, and we flew him down at 6 in the morning, and then went over to the LAPD in order to examine the sock and go over a list of items to be sent to Albany with Mr. Hodgman. And what occurred here is that, and Mr. Hodgman, I'm sure, will verify this, we were told that the courier was going to be flying out at a certain time, and there was no
Mr. Shack, let's get to the chase. What's inaccurate about this board?
Well, what's inaccurate, in particular, and I'm a witness to this, as is to Mr. Blazier and Dr. Lee himself, and we're the only defense representatives in the room. You see where it says, examined other socks, same gloves? That's not true. He changed his glove between those socks. I was watching. Mr. Blazier was watching. Dr. Lee says he did that. That's not true. Just permit me a moment, but you have to, and then there's this business about no lab coat, et cetera. The reason I have to give you the factual background, and Mr. Hodgman will back me up, is we're sitting in the front lobby of the LAPD SID lab, waiting to get our chance to see the sock, told that there's this deadline certain when the sock has to be whisked away from Dr. Lee and he can't examine it anymore because the courier is going to take it to Quantico, Virginia. And we're waiting and waiting and waiting and waiting. And there's big delays where Mr. Harmon is inside there, waiting to make arrangements for us to look at the sock, and we've brought our own microscope there. And then finally, at a time when it would only, according to their time period, have permitted something on the order of a half hour to 40 minutes to look at the sock, were allowed into the room. Now, Mr. Hodgman will be my witness as to that, because we were asking, well, what's the delay, what's the delay, what's the delay? And he's saying, I don't know, I don't know, I don't know. Let's talk about some other matters in the hallway. The reason that bothers me is that if we had even bothered to ask for a lab coat, it was our fear that these guys would take another 20 minutes to get the lab coat, and he'd have 15 minutes to look at the sock. But putting aside the lab coat issue, the real question is, he changed his gloves. It upsets me a great deal to even have that in there. That's going to be, ultimately, when Dr. Lee testifies, an issue of credibility. Let me cut right to the legal issue. The legal issue, it seems to me, is the following. This board, through this witness, is not arguably, and this testimony that he didn't change his gloves, they claim, between the examination of both socks, is only relevant on the issue of whether or not there was any cross-contamination of the sock at this point in time, or any contamination of the sock. I don't think that they contend that anything that Dr. Lee did to that sock contaminated it or created any trace evidence problem or any chain of custody problem. The defense attack with respect to when blood got on the sock is all subsequent to this examination anyhow. So in terms of whatever probative value this testimony and this board has through this witness at this time, it's minimal, if any, because that's not the purpose for which this is being offered. The purpose for which this is being offered at this time is in anticipation that Dr. Lee will testify, and Dr. Lee will testify about proper procedures for handling, examining items in a laboratory, and that they're intending to impeach him with his testimony when he comes in advance of his testifying. Now, it seems to me that if they want to raise this factual issue, that's the time to raise it. It's not probative through this witness at this time to anticipate what another witness is going to testify to. And they're not offering it for anything with respect to the chain of custody or contamination with respect to the sock.
So are you raising the specter that we're going to see both you and Mr. Blazier testify as defense witnesses?
Oh, what else can we do? They restrict our access to this. It's myself, Dr. Lee, and Mr. Blazier who are sitting there looking at it. And believe me, I was watching this because I know what the issues are in this case, and I know what proper procedures are, and I was watching this like a hawk. So the only witnesses that can even begin to, I'm going to in the position where I'm going to have to start asking Mr. Yamauchi if he's testifying to this at this time, which has minimum probative value in terms of what the purpose of offering it at this time is. The only defense witnesses in the room are lawyers who can say, this ain't true. So that's a problem. That's a 352 problem, it seems to me. And if this issue is to be visited, it seems to me that the appropriate place to visit it is that they can ask Dr. Lee on cross-examination when he testified whether he changed gloves. They can call a rebuttal witness to dispute that, and we could take it from there, and that's the appropriate time and place. To get into this now is an undue consumption of time. It's going to be confusing. It's at the wrong point in time in terms of its probative value, and it's going to require lawyers to be witnesses and to have the lawyer who was sitting right next to Dr. Lee doing this cross-examine him about it, which is not what we like to do. So it seems to me that this board and this area of testimony from this witness should be avoided at this time.
Mr. Harmon?
Mr. Scheck has a short memory. There were other non-lawyers there. I mean, Dr. Lee's not a lawyer, so he can testify about what he's got to say. But there were, I don't even remember all the people that were there. I've never seen so many people staring at two socks for as long a period of time as we did. It was an interesting session. There's a simple issue that this addresses, and Mr. Scheck skirted around it. I mean, one of the implications of all this heightened sense of awareness is they didn't have to do it then. They chose to do it then, and we allowed them to do it. You suggested it, and we allowed them to do it. So, but if you take Mr. Scheck's comments at face value, his comments suggest it's okay to be sloppy if you don't have a lot of time, and that's clearly the attack they're going to make on Mr. Yamauchi, that he was sloppy because he was in a rush to either incriminate or exonerate. So there's a little having it both ways in those comments. There's a very basic legal issue involved in this. Mr. Scheck mentioned it. This event is part of the chain of custody of those socks. Those socks went to the FBI lab that day. And we don't want anybody undermining the clear, unequivocal tests that show that there's no EDTA on those socks. And if there are any quibbling about it, Dr. Lee was there. He handled them. We want to be able to document what he did in case they want to try to put the spin that they've been spinning on our clear, unequivocal testing on the socks for EDTA. That we are entitled to demonstrate this just like we did with 47, 50, and 78. They took things, they're part of the chain of custody of those things, and they're clearly not irrelevant at this point in time. That is the primary reason that they will be presented. So to address Mr. Scheck's concern, Dr. Lee's a non-lawyer. There was a photographer there.
Whose photographs are these?
These were taken by somebody from LAPD. I don't remember which. John Taggart. I mean, we had our photographer there because, quite frankly, we get kind of tired of people saying that LAPD doesn't do things well when here's Henry Lee doing things just the way they do. You be careful. You change gloves when you have to. And so here was a chance to show that the much anticipated defense expert, he does things just the way they do. You be careful. Sometimes you touch things, sometimes you don't. And so that's why we took them, never dreaming that we'd be having this intense discussion at this point. Dr. Lee manipulated the heck out of those socks. It's all standard practice, and now it's documented. But the real problem that they have is it is an event in the chain of custody of those socks. And you will see when the FBI testimony from the EDTA comes in how important it is for this jury to appreciate all the hands that those socks went through, just in case they try to put the spin on those unequivocal results that they've been struggling with for so long. So that is the simple proposition that we want to offer this for.
All right, let me ask you about the conclusion that it makes, saying paren, same gloves, same gloves, same gloves, as to photograph 3, 5, and 6, starting from the top. Mr. Harmon, Mr. Scheck takes issue with that as a matter of fact.
Okay. Well, I'm in those photos, and I wish I could tell you I was paying attention to that. I wasn't. But Mr. Yamauchi and others who were on the photography side of the table, this is their observation. So it's another question of fact for the jury to decide, Your Honor.
All right.
But that is, I did not notice that because those socks were kind of boring to watch, and I wasn't paying attention to details. I was a little too close. So, but that is the representation from the criminalists on the other side of the table. Excuse me. Who were watching for that reason. So I can verify that again, because we certainly don't want to have that there if it's not true. But this board was prepared based on their observations. So I don't have a reason to doubt it, but if you'd like me to confirm it, I'd be happy to, Your Honor.
No, but Mr. Scheck indicates that it's his distinct recollection that that did not occur. So to allow you, his argument is going to be that to allow you to have the paren same gloves is actually argument and not just a statement of description of what's there.
Well, I mean, I've objected to all these argumentative things. No genotype consistent with O.J. Simpson. That's a conclusion that they want to have a lasting image of.
But that's an undisputed conclusion as to that glove, as to that area on the glove. This is a disputed issue.
I mean, we have to agree on fact. I mean, I guess we've done this over and over again. You've made us put mixture, or you're going to make us put mixture frequencies up in our results when that's not our scientific opinion. So I don't blame them. But, do they want to testify first and have you resolve it? I don't think there's any legal basis for that, Your Honor.
No, I don't. I agree with you.
That's what the fact finder's entitled to decide. And if we have made a mistake on that, they're entitled to think that we deceived them.
All right, if you want to use that, you can cover up the paren. No, don't interrupt me. If you want to use that, you can cover up the paren same gloves.
Your Honor, may I be heard in response? Just please be, I know that you've made one ruling, but if you just hear me on why this shouldn't be used at all, just hear me.
I heard you.
No, I mean, hear me in response to what he just said, because there's something that I'd like to emphasize that I think is relevant. If the court would just hear me on it.
Make it quick.
There is an indication there, no lab coat or hairnet, okay?
All right.
Now, the point here is going to be that I'm going to have to go into with this witness, and we're going to have to start calling witnesses. Maybe even the court's going to have to start issuing statements with respect to what was permitted and not permitted. I mean, I love the way that Mr. Harmon says, we allowed them to do it. You ordered it. You ordered it under circumstances that were extreme in the utmost. We're going to have to call Mr. Hodgman to the stand to talk about the delays in that front room while we were waiting to get in to examine this. I mean, that's what we're going to have to. That's what we're going to have to get into if this is gone into. All those facts and circumstances, and it seems to me that those are of. There's a 352 problem if you want to go into all of that.
Oh, I agree.
Now, my
I
other
agree.
suggestion to the court, it's not that I'm afraid of them testifying to what happened here at this particular point in time. My real suggestion to the court is when. The issue is as to whether or not the handling of these socks at this particular point in time has anything to do with EDTA issues, can be resolved when you hear that testimony. I don't think it does. I think that the whole point of this board at this point in time is that other issue I'm talking about, is to try to do a preemptive impeachment of a witness who hasn't testified yet. And that's where the 352 consideration comes in terms of my having to get into this witness, through this witness, all the facts and circumstances surrounding how that examination occurred and why no lab coat was accessible and why that had to be rushed, etc. And I'm going to have to ask all these questions of the witness in order to clear that up, some of which he may have knowledge of, some of which he may not, all of which are in good faith, all of which reflect our discussions, all of which I should be entitled to go into with this witness. Now, my suggestion is that in terms of this area, in terms of the 352 problems, the consumption of time, what the court would have to instruct the jury with respect to the circumstances of examination, is that if this is really going to be relevant to EDTA, then they can put them on, they can call the witness at another point in the case to testify to this aspect of the chain of custody or the details of this examination. That's my suggestion.
All right, but I think in any lawsuit, I think the plaintiff is entitled to present their case in the manner and order in which they determine. I'm not going to tell them when to call their witnesses,
Well,
other than my other rulings for discovery violations. All right, noted. Thank you. Let's see. No, not yet. Let's see the other board. I take it we won't get to that board before noontime.
Oh, no, Your Honor. This is the PCR board? Is there an objection?
that's the only other board now. Now, Your Honor, just as a matter of simple courtesy, and in keeping with our past practice, I've been asking Mr. Harmon for a day and a half for a printout of this board, which I've received and we've all received on all previous boards, and the photographs that went into this board. And previously, we'd received all photographs. The boards were made up of photographs that we'd received prior to this. Now, I don't believe that we received these photographs, but most importantly, you see all of these photographs, I should say. My particular problem has to do with the bottom rung here, and that is Pipertech product gel electrophoresis. Just in our experience taking 2 tours of the lab, the DNA lab, is that the first time that we took a tour with Mr. Yamauchi, and we were taken into the room where they did the product gel electrophoresis, which incidentally is back in the Parker Center. Back in Pipertech. They go to Parker Center, and they take the amplified product out, and they bring it back to Pipertech into I think they call it an equipment room. They changed the setup of where they did the PCR product gels in a different place. Look different, all cleaned up. And I think these photographs are of that new area where they did it, not of the original area that we first saw, which I take it is where the actual PCR product gel electrophoresis analysis was done in this case.
Mr. Harmon?
Cleaned up, I'm not sure what it's cleaned up with respect to June 13th and June 14th and 15th. I don't know how to address that. They've been there, they've taken their own pictures, they can put on their own pictures if you allow Dr. Gerdes to testify, which I'm sure you won't. I don't know what to say, Your Honor. Should we have like amplicons marching around there?
Mr. Harmon, I as much as I enjoy your style, I don't know if you were watching the jury, but when you asked the question about can applicants suddenly turn left, did you see the look on the jurors' faces when you said that?
No, you know, I'm old enough to appreciate what I do, and I appreciate your observation, Your Honor, and I understand.
Well, it has
I
about
appreciate
it has
the
about the
advice.
same effect sometimes.
But I mean, sometimes I'm
Right.
speechless. And
The
this is-
objection is that it's not an accurate photo of the location where the testing took place. Any comment on that?
That's not where the testing in this case took place?
That's how I understood the objection.
I mean, we think that it is. If it's wrong, then I'd be happy, you know,
He should talk
I
to
make
his
mistakes
witness.
all the time, Your Honor. If that's not the right photograph, I'd be happy to put the right one up there. But we've been there, we've walked through it, and if he can be more
Has your
specific.
witness seen this and told you this is the same place?
That's him in the photos.
Bottom one.
Sure, I know. I mean, we went around with him. I was with him that day, so.
Okay. If you're offering that it's accurate,
Let me just try to help him out a little bit. The first time we went through, it was in a different location, in a different place, in a different setup within that room. The second time that we took the tour, they said, we've changed the area that they did it, they gave it a wider space, they cleaned it up, they put it in a different place. My strong suspicion is it's in the second location, not the first location where they actually did the product gel in this case. It's a simple enough matter to ask his own witness what that's a picture of. I'm fairly confident. And certainly, I've never seen these pictures before. I was supposed to see him, right?
where's Mr. Yamauchi?
He's upstairs.
All right.
But we can get him.
Well, I have
now.
to give the court reporter a break. So we'll take a court reporter break, get him down here, have him take a look at the pictures, and hopefully we'll get some time in front of the jury this morning. All right, we'll take 15.
Did you finish?
Well, no, that's fine.
Do you wear gloves?
Well, when you're working with radiation, it's very important to wear gloves. You
Wear-
have to wear gloves and change them constantly.
Wear a lab
Okay.
coat?
Yes,
Have to be careful about what you touched?
definitely.
At some point when you worked at ICN, did you take some molecular biology classes at Bethesda Research Laboratories?
Yes, I did.
Could you describe those classes, please?
Back then, I took a class that it had to do with molecular cloning, which was kind of a process that's used to make more DNA. That they were more used to using back in the past before PCR really got its start.
Did you have to wear gloves with that?
Yes,
And be careful?
of course.
What did you have to be careful about when you were doing those sorts of jobs or assignments?
Well, in a different way, when working with radiation, you don't want to contaminate yourself, obviously, but you can also cross-contaminate the different types of chemicals that you're working with. So, to certain extents, both things are very important as far as wearing gloves and keeping good, solid practices and procedures.
Okay, you mentioned the term cross-contamination. You know, we're going to be talking about that quite a bit. So that's something that's not unique to the forensic application of DNA typing?
No, it's not.
Is that a standard laboratory practice in your career before you joined the police department?
As far as wearing gloves and changing them, yes.
And being careful?
Yes.
Okay. When did you actually join the Los Angeles Police Department? Do you recall the month and the year?
April, I believe, 1990.
Okay. And after you joined the police department, did you continue to take courses in your area of interest,
Yes, I did.
both through the police department and elsewhere?
Well, they were all through the police department, or through the lab, yeah.
Okay, why don't you describe some of them?
Well, could I refer to my
Sure.
CV?
While you're looking that up, you're not a peace officer, is that right?
No, I'm a civilian.
Okay.
Mr. Sheck, you have a copy of the CV?
Perhaps not the latest version.
Mr. Sheck, you want to just take a look at what Mr. Yamaguchi has? All right. Mr. Harmon?
Thank you, Your Honor. Could you, from the earliest to the most recent, could you describe the kinds of courses which lend themselves to the expertise that you have in the area of forensic DNA typing as well as conventional serology?
Objections, in fact, not in evidence yet.
Oh, well.
Okay, I started out taking a forensic serology class in May of 1990, and that was at the California Criminalistics Institute in Sacramento, California. That's a part of the Department of Justice. And in July of 1991, I had a zone electrophoresis class, also at the California Criminalistics Institute up at the DOJ. I've been to a crime scene investigation class, also through the California Criminalistics Institute, and I received training at a place called AGTC in Denver, Colorado for immunoglobulin allotyping training.
Could you describe what that is, just briefly?
That's kind of a fancy name for something that's very similar to the ABO system, except it gives you more information.
And AGTC, is that a private laboratory that regularly conducts training sessions?
Yes, as far as I know, yes.
Okay. Go ahead, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
And in September of 91 to January of 92, I took a class through, I believe it was Cal State Fullerton, and it was held at the Orange County Sheriff's Crime Laboratory, and that dealt with the forensic application of molecular biology.
Okay. Now, is that the first forensic class that you took with respect to DNA typing?
Forensic, yes, I believe so.
The Orange County Crime Lab has their own DNA lab, is that correct?
Yes, they do.
And are those the people that conducted the class?
No, this was held by a professor from Cal State Fullerton.
Do you recall what his name was?
I believe Fromson.
Okay, why don't you take up from there, then, the next classes that you took?
Actually in January of 92, I had a isoelectric focusing class also at the California Criminalistics Institute. And in August of 93, I went to a forensic PCR amplification training workshop. And that's put on by Roche Molecular Systems, who at the time would have the patent, and well, they still do have the patent on PCR.
And are they the ones that have developed, manufactured, and produced the kits that are used for PCR DQ alpha typing?
Yes.
Where was that course conducted?
That was at Alameda, California at that time.
Okay, and how many hours did that class consist of?
About 64.
And did you get any sort of credits for that?
There was a certification of completion, yes.
So you got some sort of certificate?
Yes.
Did that entail hands-on work?
Yes, it did.
Can you describe that, please?
Well, we went through the PCR process and with DQ alpha as well as other markers, which I don't do yet, but we're working on getting that online. That would be D1S80, which was discussed earlier, and also the polymarker system.
Who were the instructors in that course?
Well, we had Henry Ehrlich talked for a while. We had Jennifer Mihailovich from Ed Blake's lab came and talked. Judy Allen, I believe is her name, was the coordinator of the class. And let's see, Brian Raxel, I believe, was there to talk for a little while at the end also.
Okay, how many students were in the group?
Somewhere between 15 and 20.
And were these people from all over the country?
Yes.
And did you have to take any sort of exam? You mentioned you got a certificate. Was there an exam involved too?
I believe there was.
Okay. Do you continue to keep abreast of developments in forensic DNA typing as well as forensic serology?
Yes, I'm a member of the California Association of Criminalists, and one of the things that they have associated with that are monthly study group meetings, and I try to attend those as much as possible.
Okay. Do you also read scientific literature in the areas that you're interested in?
As far as pertaining to the casework I do, and
Sure.
Of course, yeah.
Okay. What journals do you read?
Well, there's a number of them. Just specifically.
Sure.
Well, I've read articles pertaining directly to the PCR process. I can't remember all the names and the titles and the abstracts and that.
When did you first become exposed to PCR DQ alpha typing at the Los Angeles Police Department lab?
First become exposed? Could
Yes.
you clarify that?
Yeah. When did you first become aware that the laboratory was going to do PCR DQ alpha typing?
Well, from the day I started, there was talk as to implementation of the DNA technologies, and at first they were talking about RFLP, and that was what was of interest. And later on, as the PCR, technology developed and it seemed more feasible, that was talked about more and more.
And is that about the same time you started taking the classes that had to do with PCR typing?
No, I believe they were talking about it before that.
Okay. How did it come about that that became part of your assignment, PCR typing?
Well, I believe because of my background working at ICN, I had some experience working with DNA.
And when did that happen? The decision to have you do some PCR typing?
To learn and be trained, it must have been sometime in 1993.
Okay. And when did you first begin using, just in-house, PCR DQ alpha typing?
When did I do my first case, or?
When did you just begin your handling of PCR DQ alpha typing in LAPD in any form?
I'm sorry, I don't have the specific date to that, but it would have been in 1993 sometime.
Okay. Early or late, 93?
Probably mid.
Okay. And were you the first person in the laboratory to begin implementing PCR DQ alpha typing?
No,
Who was?
Aaron Riley.
And when did that begin?
I'm not specifically sure.
How long before you began implementing PCR was it that she had begun?
Well, we were assigned the project together, except she was given more of the responsibilities because she had training from the FBI. And I'm not real sure when that was, but it was prior to 93.
Now, will you describe who Erin Riley is and what her specific assignment and title is within the laboratory?
I'm sorry, she's also another criminalist working in the serology unit, and while we work together, she's also a criminalist too.
Okay. Had the LAPD laboratory, not you, but the laboratory itself, begun accepting casework before you began accepting cases?
Casework as to the PCR process?
Yes.
Well, yes, we did in a way. We did accept cases, and after conventional screening, they may or may not have been shipped off to different laboratories that did have the technology online.
Okay. And will you describe your first exposure to PCR typing in the laboratory? I'm not talking about casework. I mean the first actual exposure you had within the laboratory, aside from the classes you've just described for the jury.
exposure is vague.
Sustain. I want to
When
rephrase
did-
that, please.
When did you first begin performing PCR DQ alpha analysis, not on casework, just in any form within the laboratory?
PCR. Once again, that would have been sometime in 1993. I don't have the specific date.
Okay. What did you do prior to that with respect to PCR DQ alpha typing before you actually began performing tests?
I did conventional serology.
Okay, but with regard to PCR DQ alpha, what did you just pick it up one day and start doing it?
Did I? I'm sorry, I don't.
Did you study protocols before you began performing the tests?
Yes, of course.
Okay, would you tell us how you began your implementation period with PCR DQ alpha?
Well, I went over the user guide that's provided by Roche Molecular Systems and looked through that. And this would have been prior to my even going to the class. But Aaron Riley had gone to the class, and so I had that information available to me. And I went over those protocols and procedures, and with Ms. Riley's help, I went through and tried to run the strips.
Okay, and over how long a period did this implementation last for you before you began doing casework?
Between the parts where I was studying and everything, 6 to 8 months.
And was it in that period that you took any of these classes as well?
Yes.
And which of the classes? The one at Roche?
Yes.
Okay. Do you remember when you actually began or accepted your first case for PCR DQ alpha typing?
I believe I have it written somewhere.
Sure, it would help to refresh your recollection if you've got it written down somewhere.
The first case was assigned to me in October of '93, and the first case for PCR that I completed was in November of '93.
Let me just look at the note that he's using.
Yes. Mr. Harmon?
Thank you, Ron. The jury's seen some of these strips, okay, and what I want to do is, I want you to describe about how many strips or tests that you actually performed with using the PCR DQ alpha system before you accepted your first case. Do you have any idea?
How many strips? Well over 100. I would have to go back and count, though.
You could if you had to.
Yes.
Go back and count. In terms of conventional serology electrophoresis tests, can you give the jury some sense of how many times you performed those sorts of tests on evidence samples?
Electrophoresis, hundreds of times.
Okay. And have you ever testified as an expert in the field of conventional serology electrophoretic typing?
Yes.
How many times?
Oh, over 20.
Over how long a period of time?
The 5 years I've been a criminalist.
Do you take any sort of proficiency test?
Yes, we run samples from CTS and College of American Pathologists.
Okay, now that's for the PCR DQ alpha system?
Yes, and they also have for conventional serology.
Have you taken any of the,
Samples.
I'm sorry, have you taken conventional serology proficiency tests?
I have once.
Okay, how many times have you taken proficiency?
For objection as to the conventional serology tests.
Overruled.
How many proficiency tests have you taken which depend on the PCR DQ alpha marker?
I would say approximately 8 or 9.
Over how long a period of time?
Well, the year and a half or so that I've been doing PCR.
And did you actually take any proficiency tests before you accepted your first casework in October of '93?
I might have. I would have to go back and check the records.
Now, you've mentioned two organizations, CTS,
Yes.
that the Collaborative Testing Service,
Yes, it is.
and when you take those tests, do you know it's a proficiency test?
Yes.
Do you know what the answer is ahead of time?
No, I don't.
Okay. When you take the CAP, that's the College of American Pathologists?
Yes.
Okay. Do you know the answer ahead of time when you take that test?
No.
Do you know it's a proficiency test?
Yes, I do.
Have you ever been graded as having made a mistake in any of those proficiency tests?
No.
Does that mean you couldn't make a mistake?
Does it? Well, no, it doesn't.
Have you ever testified as an expert in a court in the field of forensic PCR DQ alpha typing?
Yes.
How many times?
Twice.
In what courts in this county?
Yes.
Have there ever been times when you've attempted to testify but have not been found qualified to testify in the field of PCR DQ alpha typing?
No.
When were those two times?
I would have to go back and check the records.
Okay. Can you give us a ballpark?
Last year.
Now, in the test that you've performed, the PCR DQ alpha testing, have you ever excluded anyone who was suspected of having committed a crime?
Yes.
Any idea how many times?
Well, offhand, I can think of at least once, but there might have been more.
How many strips test samples have you subjected to the PCR DQ alpha test as you sit there today?
I'm not sure. I would have to go back and count them all.
Can you give us a ballpark figure?
Well, 500 to 1,000, maybe even more than that. I don't know.
Do you have any idea how many actual cases you have worked on for PCR DQ alpha typing?
I believe around 60.
Does the Los Angeles Police Department have a lengthy written protocol for the performance of PCR DQ alpha testing?
Objection, characterization.
Sustained. Rephrase the question.
Does the Los Angeles Police Department Scientific Investigations have a written PCR protocol?
Yes, we have a set of guidelines for our PCR practices.
Okay, and does the protocol include other PCR markers in addition to DQ alpha?
I believe so at this time.
Okay. And are you familiar with the Los Angeles Police Department Scientific Investigation written protocol?
Yes, I'm familiar with it.
Is it based on the Roche DQ alpha user guide?
Yeah, many parts are very similar.
We're going to talk about some events in June and then move on pretty shortly, but I'm going to ask you questions about PCR DQ alpha tests you performed on evidence in this case in the middle of June. Okay, but before we get to that, I'd like to ask you generally, when you performed the tests that you will be testifying about shortly on the evidence samples in this case, did you perform them in accordance with the Los Angeles Police Department SID written protocol for PCR DQ alpha typing?
Objection, since that's not evidence.
Yes, I did.
Let's go back to June 13th, 1994. What hours were you working those days?
It was either 7 to 3:30 or 7:30 to 4.
Do you recall late in your workday on June 13th having a conversation with Greg Matheson about what you know this case is about?
Yes.
What did Mr. Matheson discuss with you?
He asked me if I,
Objection, hearsay, I think. is
Sustained.
coming.
It's not offered for the truth of the matter, Your Honor.
Sustained.
Did you have a discussion with Mr. Matheson about this case?
yes, I did.
And based on this case, and did you consider what Mr. Matheson discussed with you late on June 13th in deciding what tests to perform ultimately in this case?
Yes.
Did you actually do anything with respect to this case on June 13th,
No, I did not.
other than the conversation with Mr. Matheson?
Yes, other than that conversation.
Do you remember what time you came to work on June 14th?
June 14th,
Yes.
7 or 7:30.
And did you have another discussion with Mr. Matheson?
I believe I talked to him in the morning, yes.
And now, you're in the serology division, okay? Do you have a separate room within the laboratory?
The serology?
Yes.
Yes, there's a serology unit area.
Okay, and is that something that there's security to get in, some sort of security device?
We have to use our access cards.
And do you understand there's actually a printout that shows the comings and goings of people if they use the access card?
Yes.
Have you seen those things occasionally, the printouts?
Yes, I have.
Okay. Now, where was Mr. Matheson's office at that time with respect to serology?
At that time, he was serology supervisor. His office would be within the serology unit.
Did you talk about this case?
Yes.
And what did you discuss with Mr. Matheson?
At this point, a hearsay objection. Depends on what
Sustained.
he's gonna list.
It's to explain his future conduct. It's not offered for the truth of the matter, Your Honor.
I can get an idea of what he
Why don't
intends
you
to
confer
do.
with counsel? Would you confer with counsel briefly?
No problem. Your objection? Based on what he told me.
Proceed.
I'm going to turn the clock back a day then and ask you, let's go back to June 13th, the end of the day. You have a discussion with Mr. Matheson about the case.
Yes.
What did Mr. Matheson tell you at that time about the case?
He asked me if I would want to work on this case. He's not sure all the aspects, but he believes that it could involve sexual assault as well as blood evidence and conventional and quite possibly PCR testing.
Okay, what else anything else come up in that conversation?
I can't remember back all that well.
Okay, let's talk about the next morning. You go in, you're talking to Mr. Matheson again. Did you have a more specific discussion with him at that point?
Yes, I believe so. He probably had more information then, so we would talk more.
And could you tell us what you and Mr. Matheson discussed at that point?
At that point, he seemed to think that we had evidence that would need certain types of specific testing. And I recall him talking, possibly doing something that would be fast, like an ABO test. And we discussed that a little bit, and I said, well, ABO has limited power of separating things out, because, for instance, a type O can be approximately half of the population. And so because that system's kind of weak in that respect, we discussed the possibility of using PCR DQ alpha, because that would have a little bit better chance at sorting things out into finer groups.
And you mentioned that speed was somehow of importance. Why was that?
And I believe at the time there were reasons that I wasn't quite aware of or made aware of, but they had to do with investigative reasons why the detectives would need results rather quickly.
During the discussion with Mr. Matheson, were specific items of evidence talked about?
He referred me to Dennis Fung to discuss what items of evidence would be good to pick and choose for analysis.
Was anyone else there in serology at the time you had this conversation with Greg Matheson?
Well, I can't remember back all that well who was there and who wasn't.
I mean, is that an area where many people work?
Well, yeah, there's usually the serology unit members are always in and out.
And did you have this conversation with Mr. Matheson in his office or out in the laboratory work area?
One or the other.
Okay. As a result of that conversation, or strike that, was Dennis Fung a party to this conversation?
I believe I first talked to Dennis back in the evidence processing room.
Before or after this conversation?
It would be afterwards.
So was Dennis Fung present while you were having this conversation with Greg Matheson?
I'm not sure.
After the discussion that you've just mentioned to us, did you go back to find Dennis?
Yes, that would have been the next thing on my mind. Go look for Dennis to go discuss what stains to pick out and analyze.
Is that what you did?
Yes.
Where did you find him?
I believe I must have, well, let's see here. Yeah, I would have talked to him in the evidence processing room, because that's where he would be discussing the evidence with me.
Okay. And do you recall about how long after the conversation with Greg Matheson it was that you found Dennis Fung and talked to him about the case in the evidence processing room?
It's got to be less than half an hour, less than 15 minutes.
Okay. Do you recall if anyone else was present when you had a conversation that you'll be telling us about this afternoon with Dennis Fung?
This afternoon, what was that?
Sorry, that was a bad question. We take a break now, Your Honor, before we move on?
Well, why don't you ask him that last question?
Sure. But was anyone else present when you had the conversation with Dennis Fung about this case?
No.
Okay.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to take our recess for the morning session. Please remember all of my admonitions to you. Don't discuss this case amongst yourselves. Don't form any opinions about the case. Don't conduct any deliberations till the matter has been submitted to you. Do not allow anybody to communicate with you with regard to the case. Council will stand in recess until 1 o'clock. And let me see, Ms. Clark and Mr. Cochran.
Hearing this all along, but we have controls and we have sample, and that's why there's generally two there. Well, regardless of order, I handle these in the same fashion, so I don't necessarily do my sample and my control first. But what I would do is open this up, put it down onto the Kim White pad, and then I would proceed to opening up the scalpel blade, and then take out the sterile scalpel blade and do my cutting. And then with the sterile scalpel blade, I've learned if you press down on it at a certain angle, you can actually pick the sample up that you're going to put into the tube. And when you get good at this stuff, like anything else, you can take a tube and you can open it up with one hand and then put the sample in, close the tube off with one hand, put it away. The scalpel blade goes back into the container it originally was held in so that it doesn't cut anybody. That's put to the side or, tossed out if you've got the receptacle there. Then the same process is started all over again. This is closed off. Sometimes I'll initial the bindles, or I'll initial the coin envelope, or I'll do both, just to be on the safe side. These Kim wipes, along with the scalpel blade, rolled up, tossed into the receptacle, and then work on the next one. The whole process all over.
Okay, and then what would you do with the bindles?
The bindles are then placed back into the coin envelope, put on the side, and then the whole process starts over again with the next one. But this has to be closed off before you start on the next sample.
Why
You
is
don't
that?
want two of them open at the same time. Because even though you separate it out, it's still not good lab practice to have them open simultaneously.
All right, Mr. Yamaguchi, why don't you return to your seat on the witness stand, please?
Now, when you actually open one of these bindles, we've had a discussion about you approximate how large they are and describe them in your notes.
Yes, I try to achieve that approximation by drawing them out.
Is that what you did in this case?
Overruled.
Yes, it is.
And do you have notes that actually describe the numbers and sizes of the swatches in this case?
Yes, I draw out all the swatches, and I have notes to that.
And why do you do that?
Well, just to give me a general idea of what's there.
And when you actually cut one of these swatches, do you make any sort of record of what you cut?
Yeah, occasionally, and in this case, I do a score mark over the swatch that I cut in the drawing.
Okay, Your Honor, I'd like to have marked as Exhibit 279, one of Mr. Yamauchi's notes in this case.
All right. Which page?
Mr. Yamauchi, I'd like to show you Exhibit 278 for identification. Is this the...
278 or 279?
The 279. These are the notes that you made with respect to documenting the sampling of the items in this case, or
Yes,
some of the items?
yes,
These are the items that were in the coin envelopes.
yes.
And just to go back to that again, giving us the evidence item numbers, could you tell us which evidence items you processed in the manner that you've just demonstrated to the jury for the first set of tests that you'll be discussing?
Objection vague as to time.
Rephrase the question.
Could you give us the numbers of the evidence items that you processed on the morning of June 14th?
Okay, again, referring to my notes, the evidence item number 52, 49, 50, 48, 47. and according to my notes, sampled between 10 and 11 approximately on the 14th of June 1994.
Okay, Your Honor, I'd like to put 279 up on the envelope if I could. Mr. Yamauchi, let's look at item 49, if you will. Could you just assist the jury in interpreting all the information that's in that horizontal row there, starting with 114?
114 was, and it's in quotes because that's what was written on the coin envelope. The 49 above it was written in once I knew which item number it corresponded to. And then coin envelope, and then in quotes, 114, describing the coin envelope. And paper bindle, and one of the paper bindles with, in quotes, number 114, describing what was written on the paper bindle. And then there are 6 swatches drawn out. And then in the next column over, it says 5.5 swatches ample.
What did you mean by that, 5.5 swatches ample?
I just described what was left over after I sampled.
And does that horizontal row, does that also show where you tried to show how much you cut, which item you cut and how much you cut?
On the last swatch, I did a dotted line to show approximately where I scored it.
Okay, and looking at what appears to be 114C, the substrate control, what's the wording that you have to the right of that? What's that reflect?
White with BRN, which to me means brown specks.
Okay, would you jump up one column and look at what's 117C or 52, the substrate control? What observation did you make about the color of that substrate control?
Pink color.
And so did you do that with each and every one of the stains and substrate controls that you sampled on June 14th? In other words, make that kind of documentation.
Yes, in my casework, I oftentimes take general, very general color descriptions of what's there.
Okay, and how near to the actual size and shape of the swatches are your little sketches of those swatches?
Well, it's pretty close, but it's not meant to be a precise sort of a depiction.
Okay. How long did it take to complete the sampling process of these coin envelopes? 41, items 41, 42, 47, 48, 49, and 52.
Well, I listed in my notes that they were sampled between 10 and 11, so sometime within then.
Okay. And what did you do with each of these coin envelopes after you finished processing it in the way that you've demonstrated for the jury?
Well, they were placed back where I found them.
Okay. Now, in terms of who had responsibility for those items at that point in time, who was responsible for them now that you had completed your sampling of them?
They'd be in, I guess, the custody of the person that was collecting them. That would be Dennis.
Dennis Fong. And is that normally the person that books them?
The person that collects the items, yes, generally speaking, is the person that's going to book the items.
So at this point in time, can you describe, you mentioned something, you showed the jury how you unscrewed and screwed the cap on these microcentrifuge tubes. What were you putting them in?
A microcentrifuge tube rack.
And how many tubes can each of those racks hold?
It varies. Usually there's 16 to a row. I think these had, I would say approximately 32 for that particular rack.
And are those tubes, do they provide a safeguard against contamination if the seal is on them?
Sustained.
What are those tubes made out of?
Some kind of a plasticky substance, polyethylene perhaps.
What's the purpose of the cap?
The purpose of the cap is to seal it off, make sure that nothing gets in or out.
And is it your practice never to have more than one?
Sustained.
What is your practice with respect to having more than one tube open at a time?
Well, that's not a good idea. I mean, it's something you don't want to do.
And did you have more than one tube open at a time in any of the processing of the evidence in this case?
No.
After you processed the coin envelopes in the manner that you described, did you then turn your attention to the glove that Mr. Fung had talked to you about?
Sustained.
Did you process the glove at some point that morning?
Sometime in the morning or maybe the early afternoon, I'm not sure specifically.
Okay. Tell us how you began that processing activity.
Well, taking a look at it, I knew I was going to have to sample it in some way, so I had somebody come by and photograph it. As far as the handling specifically of the gloves, I put a clean piece of paper out and examined the gloves on top of the clean paper. Excuse me, the glove. So, talking about number 9.
Sure, the glove that was found at Rockingham,
Right.
number 9. Now, where were the tubes, the centrifuge, the microcentrifuge tubes in the racks? Where were they when you began processing the glove?
I'm not sure.
Okay. Where were the coin envelopes when you began processing the glove?
The coin envelopes would have been in that same area that they were given to me at.
Okay, and where did you process the glove?
I seem to recollect working on the hard bench countertop that's just, it would be right to the side of the table that all the evidence was on.
When you say right to the side, can you give us a little better description of the relationship?
Well, it's kind of hard to without a picture, but let's say it would be on the same countertop that the clean paper is by.
And what top is the set of coin envelopes on?
It's on a table that's in the middle of the room near the hood.
A different table than the glove was on?
Yes,
Okay. And you put a clean piece of paper down?
yes.
Why did you do that?
Well, again, that's standard lab procedure to make sure you treat evidence in such a way that it won't contaminate with anything.
Okay. Will you describe, you mentioned you brought somebody over to photograph the glove?
Yes.
Who was that?
I believe I tried to get John Taggart, and it might have been Mike Wilson that photographed it, one or the other.
And when did he photograph it in relation to the sampling that you undertook?
I'm not sure.
Was it before or after?
After.
Okay. Will you describe the first part of the processing of the glove, please?
Okay, the glove was laid out on the paper, and it really wasn't super obvious that it was could have been soaked in blood or could add a lot of blood. So I did what's called a phenolphthalein test. It's a presumptive test for the presence of blood.
How did you do that?
Well, that's done by taking a clean cotton swab, moistening it with deionized water, and allowing some of the stain that would be on the glove to transfer to that swab. From that point, chemicals are added to that swab, and these chemicals, upon reacting positively with something that's most likely blood will turn a pink color.
Okay, and how many separate areas did you perform the phenolphthalein test?
I'm going to look at my notes.
Sure. Did you make those notes close to the time that you did the sampling?
Yes.
Okay.
One, two. About seven times.
And what were the results of those phenolphthalein tests?
In each spot that I tested on that particular glove, there was a positive result.
Okay, and that's just an indicator that it might be blood?
Yes, it is.
Okay. What did you do after you got those 7 presumptive positive results from the glove?
Well, I knew I needed to pick a spot to sample the glove, and one of the things we have problems with in PCR is when you use leather in the testing, it's been documented that leather causes inhibition of the test, so it's often hard to get results when you use leather samples. So what I did was I collected from a number of different areas, and 2 of them I took actual cuttings of the leather to see if I could get results. And to back myself up, because I knew that leather didn't always produce results, I also took a cutting from an area that was not made of leather, and that would be the lining area, as well as I took one sample from an area by swatching in the same manner that was described to you out at the crime scenes, where we use the cotton swatches to transfer the stain to the swatch and then analyze that swatch.
Did you attempt to take a substrate control from the glove?
Well, in the process of trying to find an area that was free of any blood, I decided that, well, in this case, this glove seems to be covered with blood to a certain extent, and I wasn't going to mess around and test all over the place to try to locate an area that may or may not have blood. I didn't want to manipulate that item any further at that point. So I chose at that time not to collect control on this particular item.
Okay, and did you make notes in a drawing that reflected the areas that you sampled on the glove?
Yes, I did.
Your Honor, may I have marked as Exhibit 279? I'm one behind today. 280?
280.
Thank you, Your Honor. May I put it on the projector, Your Honor? Mr. Yamauchi, is this the sketch that you made at the same time you were conducting the sampling on the glove?
Yes, it is.
Okay, and in the lower left-hand corner, looks like there's a notched area and something says initials CY. Could you tell us what that is, what that represents?
That's where I put my identifying mark on that particular item.
Okay, and if we could move over to the right sketch a little bit, could you describe to the jury what's shown in the right-hand sketch on 280 for identification?
That would indicate the area where I spot checked for a control, as well as an area that I ended up sampling for testing.
Okay, if you would, you got an X with an arrow to it that says spot check for control. That's one of the phenol areas.
Yes, it is.
And then I see a letter, is that a letter D? Where it says phenol, and then sample cutting taken?
I think that's the area I marked off as the area where I sampled.
Okay, that's just a circle where you cut it out?
Right.
Okay. And then, it looks like the thumb area. Could you describe to the jury what that shows?
Again, there's the area where I would have sampled.
Okay, and that's, you've designated that area B?
Yes.
And the one, looks like it's inside the rear, or inside the wrist on the back of the hand, that's area C?
Yes.
And then can we go up to the next sketch there? You've got that described as backside of the glove. Can you describe to the jury what your notes mean in that?
Okay, on A, I took a cutting, and that also was phenopositive. And on D, that area down towards the right, lower right corner of the glove, that was the area that I sampled the stain by use of a cotton cloth swatch.
And I believe that's, you did that to try to avoid the inhibition problem that's well known?
Yes, just in case I couldn't.
Hold on. Withdrawn?
Leading the
Withdrawn.
Scott.
I'm sorry. That's yes, because I knew that could potentially cause a problem, so I decided to sample in different ways, and that was why.
Okay, so, and you've labeled them A, B, C, and D. Did those lettering follow the samples that you cut out or that you took from the glove when you did your processing in this case, or your typing?
Yes.
Okay. Now, up to this point, Mr. Yamauchi, you've described making the Fitzco card, processing the coin envelopes, and the glove. At some point, did you come back to the Fitzco card?
Yes, eventually I sampled that card.
And when was that in the sequence of events?
Sure.
Last.
Proceed.
Thank you, Your Honor. I left out a little bit here, Mr. Yamauchi, I'm sorry. When you made these cuttings from the glove, what did you do with them?
They would be in the extract tubes.
Microcentrifuge tubes?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, and how did you process them when you're doing all this sampling of the glove? Could you describe the sequence that you did them in? The samples?
You mean when did I sample each particular one?
Sure.
Well, I'm not sure, but judging by my notes, I would have done it in the A, B, C, D order.
Okay. And each time, or would you describe what you did each time, how you put it in the tube?
Okay, for each particular area sampled, if say I used a cutting, I would have went through that process like I was cutting up a swatch. I would have used a sterile scalpel blade for that particular area, and then manipulated the tube with that hand and used the scalpel blade to put the sample into the tube, just in the same way as I did with the cloth swatches a little earlier. And with collection of the cloth swatch, I would have done that by taking sterile water and a cloth swatch, moistening the cloth swatch with the water and rubbing it on the area of the glove that I intended to get a transfer and transfer some of this biological fluid onto that. And then I would have taken that swatch and put it into a microcentrifuge tube in the same manner, not allowing any of the tubes to be opened simultaneously.
Now, where was the processing of the glove done with respect to the Fitzco card that's drying somewhere?
It would have been about 10 feet away.
Same table or different tables?
That would be at that time on the same table.
But about 10 feet apart?
Yeah.
So you've got the Fitzco card drying, everything in tubes, and I believe you said you sampled the Fitzco card last?
To strike.
Sustain, rephrase the question.
Did you sample the Fitzco card after you sampled the glove?
Overruled.
Yeah, yes, looking at my notes, that was the last thing in order.
Could you tell us what you're looking at there and why you're so sure that you sampled it last?
Because I have my DNA extraction record, and that was the last one I listed.
Okay. And how did you actually go about sampling the Fitzco card?
In the same fashion as if it were an evidence item, all the same precautions being taken. It would be cut out with the sterile scalpel blade.
Put in the same kind of tube
Yes, in the same microcentrifuge tube.
and in a rack?
Yes.
Okay. Now, I believe in some of your earlier discussions, was it impressed on you that there was a hurry to do this testing?
To a certain extent, they wanted investigative information.
Okay. And is there any way, if you hurry these things, that you can change the results?
Leading. Rephrase the question.
Based on what you knew, did you have an expectation what the outcome of these tests would be?
Speculation.
Overruled.
It's not offered for the truth of the matter, you know.
I overruled the objection.
So,
Okay, I'm sorry, I lost my train of thought.
sure. Based on the information that was made available to you, what did you expect the outcome would be?
Objection.
Overruled.
You mean, like, from what I heard on the news, or?
Yeah.
Overruled.
Well, I thought it would be an exclusion.
Why?
Your Honor, move to strike.
Let's see counsel at the sidebar with the court report, please. Mr. Harmon, 2:30.
Excuse me, Your Honor?
2:30.
Okay. Mr. Yamauchi, you've been watching television, the televised proceedings in this case occasionally?
Yes.
Have you heard the term examiner bias?
Yes.
You familiar with it?
Well, I'd like to hear an explanation, but I have an idea of what it means.
Okay.
Overruled.
Based on what you'd heard in the media at the time, or, before you did the test in this case, did you have an expectation what the outcome of these tests would be?
Overruled.
Well, on the 13th, the last thing I heard in the evening,
Your Honor, that's
It's non-responsive. Did you have an expectation, yes or no?
yes.
And what was that based on?
Objection.
Overruled.
Calls for hearsay.
Overruled.
Well, like I was saying, I heard on the news that, well, yeah, he's got a airtight alibi. He's in Chicago, and and it's his ex-wife and this and that. And I thought, oh, well, he's probably not related to this thing.
All right. Let me see counsel on the side, bro.
Thank you, Your Honor. Now, where do you actually begin the PCR process in the LAPD SID? Where's the first step performed?
The extraction,
Yes.
yes, that would be performed in the serology unit at Piper Tech.
Okay. Now, where is that in relation to, the jury's seen a diagram, I'm not going to get it up again, but how far away is that from the evidence processing room?
I'd say over 100 feet.
Okay. How did you get these racks with the microcentrifuge tubes from the evidence processing room to serology?
Well, they were capped and I carried them there.
Okay. Now, you've referred to something that lists the order in which the samples were processed that you used to help to refresh your recollection. What are you referring to?
Well, that's my extraction record.
And is that the order that the samples were actually processed by you?
Overruled.
No, it's not, but it refreshes my recollection as to the last one I put on there.
Okay. And with regard to the next step or the first step in the PCR process, the extraction process, what order did you process the samples for extraction in this case?
They would be, as to the item number on this sheet, which is a different number from what the actual item number is. There's a listing of the extraction number, which is 84, and then it goes chronologically down through 21. I usually set my tubes up in that order
Okay.
for the extraction.
Sure. And would you please describe the order in which you process these tubes for extraction? If you need to refresh your recollection, that would be fine.
Okay, according to my extraction record, item number 9, glove, A, backside sample is 84-1, followed by item number 9, glove, B, thumb sample, glove, C, inside back of wrist, glove, D, back of back below little finger. And then item number 112, which, as we discussed later, is actual evidence item number is different, but that would be the photo item number at that time.
That's LAPD item number 47, the evidence item?
Yes.
Okay, go ahead.
And then item number 113, oh wait, I skipped over the control. But the 47 with the red stain, and then its control. And then listed on my sheet is item number 113, which is 48, red stain, followed by its control. And so on for 114, and then 115, and then 117, and then 106, and then 107. And finally, item number 18, O.J. Simpson blood exemplar.
Okay, you started skipping there. Did you process the substrate controls with 49, 50, and 52 right after you did the red stain?
Objection, leading.
Sustain.
When did you process the 49 substrate control with respect to the red stain?
In the extraction, it would have been one behind that.
One behind the red stain?
Yes.
And then when did you process the 50 control with respect to the 50 red stain?
Right behind the 50 stain.
And before 52?
Yes. Keep in mind, though, that to a certain extent, this is all happening at the same time period. It's just that you can only open one cap at a time, like I described before. So there is an actual process.
And so you, in this step as well, you never open more than one tube at a time?
Leading. Sustain.
In this part of the processing, do you ever open more than one tube at a time?
Overruled.
No.
And then you mentioned 106 and 107, that those correspond to 41 and 42?
Yes.
And did 41 also have a substrate control?
Objection,
Leading. Overruled.
Yes.
And did 42 also have a substrate control?
Yes.
Why did you process 41 and 42 at the end of the line, like as you've described them?
I really can't give a particular reason for that.
Okay, how about the reference to, or by now it's been the cutting from the Fitzco card. Why was that last in the order you process things?
objection, left. Withdraw.
Yeah, it was the last thing I was working on. And I don't know, maybe I subconsciously grouped them up together as exemplars in a group.
And were there also other items that you processed in this extraction process period?
Yes, there would be blood standard number 1.
What is
As-
that? What is that?
Described earlier, we were talking about controls. Well, within our analysis, the laboratory testing, we have controls that go beyond the ones that are just collected at the scene. There are both positive and negative controls. The positive controls show us that, yes, you do get this certain type of, the process works, and, you know, it's what you expect. The negative controls shows you that there's no contaminating factors or anything weird like that going on. In this case, blood standard number 1 is what I use as a positive control, whereas the next one down after that is the cloth control, and that would be utilized as a negative control.
All right, Mr. Harmon, I think this would be a good point. All right, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to take a brief recess. Please remember my admonitions to you. Let me ask you to step back into the jury room at this time. Mr. Yamuchi, you can step down.
Where it was, I believe, stated, at least in his recollection, that the defendant was in Chicago at the time that he received the call. We already have testimony to that effect. That's nothing new. And it's certainly not a part of his testimony, a part of the defendant's statement. To say that his recollection of a news report somehow opens up the defendant's statement, it makes no sense at all. And I think that the court needs to look at the statement itself. But the testimony, if we have it read back, will make that very clear. He was watching the news. He saw a news program saying the defendant was in Chicago, and so he concluded, this witness concluded, that he had an alibi.
Can we have the witness leave the room?
The witness knows what he testified to. He just said it. And to say somehow, for the defense to argue that somehow that opens up the defendant's statement is ridiculous. He's talking about a news report and a conclusion he drew from that news report. What does that have to do with what the defendant said?
Well, here's the problem. What Mr. Yamauchi said was, quote, like I was saying, I heard on the news, well, yeah, he's got an airtight alibi. He's in Chicago, and you know that, and it's his ex-wife, and this and that, and I go, oh, well, he's probably not related to the scene. The problem here is he's got an airtight alibi. Now,
That was this witness's conclusion, Your Honor.
I understand that. The problem is, a party has brought in the alibi part. He's got an alibi. They have brought in, I think you got a 356 problem.
We don't have a 356 problem, Your Honor. We brought out this witness's entire knowledge of the events. And he's not premising that on his knowledge of the defendant's statement because he didn't know what the defendant's statement was. No one did. How could that possibly be a 356 issue with respect to a defendant's statement when he didn't even know about it? He's not talking about that. He's talking about his conclusion drawn from the fact that he heard the defendant was in Chicago. How could that possibly relate to the content of the defendant's statement?
The statement
He didn't
is,
relate to the content of the statement either.
he's got an airtight alibi. He
That-
was in Chicago.
That was this witness's conclusion, Your Honor, not a reference to that statement. He made no reference to the defendant's statement, and he didn't even know about the defendant's statement. How could we possibly have a 356 in a situation where the witness doesn't even know what that is? The witness is talking about his state of mind, what he concludes from a news report, nothing to do with the defendant's statement. So how can we have a 356 issue with reference to a statement this witness never talked about, never knew about, never mentioned?
You ask him a question that elicited, he's got an airtight alibi, he's in Chicago.
That was this witness's opinion, Your Honor. What does that have to do with the defendant's statement? Which, by the way, does not state that he had an airtight alibi because he was in Chicago. That was not his statement.
All right.
So how could we possibly have a 356 on that?
Points and authorities tomorrow morning, 9 o'clock.
All right.
Oh, absolutely.
Sir, we certainly aren't going to yell at Your Honor and become hysterical. We would,
I
I just
object
point
to
out...
that characterization,
okay,
Your Honor.
well,
That kind of personal attack is very improper and inappropriate. The court knows that it was simply advocacy. I'm not yelling at anyone. And for Mr. Cochran to make that kind of sexist remark, hysterical, I take great umbrage at it. And I think the court should not countenance that kind of behavior.
I don't.
She finished? Yeah, Your Honor, I'm not going to yell at Your Honor. I'm going to try to deal with the facts. Mr. Scheck, as the court is quite aware, tried to object at the appropriate time, and we even had a sidebar in this regard. The people brought this matter out. They're hoisted by their own petard. We will welcome the opportunity to do this, Your Honor. I think you're absolutely right. It's a 356 problem. This witness was very clear. They brought it out to the jury, and now we think we have a right to bring out Mr. Simpson's entire statement. We have no objection, Your Honor, seeing that statement, no objection to the points and authorities, but we think it's very, very clear. They've opened the door, Your Honor, with a Mack truck, and we think we can walk through it. And I think it's very appropriate to do that. So we'll be glad to
Points
do
and
that.
authorities tomorrow
Thank
morning,
you.
9 o'clock. All right, we'll take a 15-minute recess. Jury members, Mr. Yamauchi, would you resume the witness stand, please? All right, Mr. Harmon.
Thank you, Your Honor. Mr. Yamauchi, you had mentioned that the next tube in order was the cloth control. Can you explain to the jury what the function of the cloth control is in the PCR DQ alpha processing?
It acts as a negative control in the analytical process. For that particular step, from that point on, it would show us whether something funny happened or not.
When you say show us whether something funny happened, could you give us an idea what you mean by that?
Well, it's kind of inherent in the way I described it. And by negative control, we expect it to come up negative. But if it comes up and it shows that there's some activity or something there, then quite possibly some of our solutions at that point could have been contaminated. And this would be a way that we could double check and know later on if something was astray or different, that at this point, a contaminant was present.
And how would that tell you if any of those things happen, that control?
That control, like I was saying before, generally speaking, we expect it to be negative. But if some activity comes up throughout the whole process where we see something on a strip, then we know that perhaps something happened at that stage, and it would help us and aid us in troubleshooting.
When you say see something on a strip, you mean a typing result?
Yes.
Okay. And what about the next control in order after the cloth control on this first set of DQ alpha typing? What was that? After the cloth control?
On my extraction sheet, there's nothing else
Okay.
after the cloth control.
I believe at some later point you also add amplification controls.
Yes, that's correct.
Your Honor, at this point I'd like to have marked as People's 281 for identification, a photo display board. The LAPD PCR typing board.
All right, 281.
Okay, Mr. Yamauchi, you've generally described the extraction procedure that you utilized in this case. In referring to People's 281 for identification, could you step down and using the pointer, could you please describe what's shown in the photograph, starting at the top horizontal strip that we've boxed in? It's entitled Piper Tech Extraction. Now, the jury has heard what Piper Tech is, but you've mentioned that the extraction is in the serology room?
Serology, yes.
Okay, and in the left-hand photo under Piper Tech Extraction, could you explain what you are doing in that photograph?
Okay, at this point right here, the first step is to add 1 ml of sterile water. And that's to get out some extraneous components that may or may not be a problem. And one case in point would be the heme group that makes blood red. That's a known inhibitor of the PCR process. So at this point here, by adding the water, it puts that heme group in the solution, and it can later be separated from the DNA that we're actually after.
Mr. Yamauchi, could you try to keep your voice up because you've got your back to the court reporter too. I know it's important that we all get to hear you, okay? Good. Okay. What's in the next photograph, the middle photograph under Piper Tech Extraction?
I believe I'm actually putting the water into the tube at that point.
And is that the same tube that you started out by putting the cuttings that you made over in the evidence processing room in, or is that a different one?
Yes, that would be what's going on there.
Okay, and then over on the right-hand side, what is that you're doing, and what is that machine?
Oh, okay. After the water's placed into the tubes and allowed to soak for about 20 minutes or so, it's then put into what's called a centrifuge, or microcentrifuge, hence the name microcentrifuge tubes. This is why they belong together. Goes into that instrument, and it spins it down at such a high velocity that all the solid components, or the heavier components, like DNA, for example, are going to be forced towards the bottom, while the other components that are in solution would just remain in solution.
Okay, now, what do you do with those tubes that are, after they've been centrifuged at the end of the extraction process? What's left?
Well, from that point, there's another step where we add a chemical called, well, it's a kind of a mixture of chemicals called Helix. And it acts in a specific function in the extraction process and this is kind of weird because they're not really sure what its actual action is, but they do know that it does aid in taking out a component that could help in the degradation of DNA. So to a certain extent, it acts as a kind of a preservative.
Now, are there different forms of extraction processes that one can do in order to do the PCR DQ alpha typing?
Helix is the one we use at our lab, or the one that I use in this case. There's also what's known as a phenylchloroform extraction.
Is that what's known as organic extraction?
Yes.
Okay. Now, are you familiar with the Amplotype user guide for PCR DQ alpha typing that's provided by the manufacturer?
Yes.
Are both of those extraction processes described in the user guide?
Yes, they are.
Why did you do the Helix extraction procedure in this case?
Well, generally speaking, that's the procedure that we use, or I use personally most often. And that would be one reason. The other reason would be that it actually has lesser steps and is faster.
Okay. And do you process the evidence, or strike that? When you perform the extraction process, is it your practice to never open more than one tube at a time?
Sustain. Phrase the question.
Yes, the same question always does that.
Speaking objection, counsel.
Mr. Yamauchi, how many tubes do you open at any given time during the extraction process?
The same thing goes for this process, one tube at a time.
And is that something that you adhere to throughout the whole PCR DQ alpha processing?
Overruled.
Yes.
And for the same reasons you described in the beginning?
Objection made.
Overruled.
Yes.
Now, could you describe how long the Helix extraction process takes in comparison with the organic extraction process?
Well, I haven't done the organic one in a while, so I'd have to reference that to get a time frame on it. But as far as the Helix is concerned, for blood stains, it's in an hour and a half about you can get the extraction completed.
And is that the normal amount of time that it takes you?
Sustain.
How long does it usually take you to perform the Helix extraction process in other cases?
Objection made with respect to sin.
Overruled.
Yes, an hour and a half.
Now, at the end of the extraction procedure, where do all the tubes end up?
They would have been kept in that same rack,
So,
closed off.
how do they get from the centrifuge to the rack?
Well, I take them out.
And then what do you do after you put them in the rack?
After they're put in the rack, see, the next step would be amplification. So that rack of tubes would have to go over to where we have our thermal cycler, and that's the machine we use to do the amplification. We have that set of our laboratory over at the Parker Center facility. So there's a space difference of about a couple miles maybe or so. Got to hop in a car and drive over there.
Now, are you familiar with the provisions in the Amplotype user guide with respect to the relationship of the amplification room to other work areas in the PCR DQ alpha process, the recommendations?
The recommendations, safety precautions, they want all these rooms basically separated off in space, and especially the amplification room and the extraction and examination areas.
And why is that?
To eliminate the chances of cross-contamination. What's especially of interest at this point is when you're dealing with the amplification area, There's a second type of contaminant called, well, you've probably heard this already, PCR carryover. It's where the product of the PCR process is more likely to contaminate things than just general DNA because it's of a perfect size and sequence. It's more likely to be a harmful contaminant. And that's why we take extra precautions to keep this area physically out of the way of the other areas where we do our extractions and our evidence analyzing.
And yours is pretty separate then, huh?
Well, yeah, yes, in our case it is.
Are you aware of any other laboratory that has those two rooms so far apart?
Objection, no foundation.
Overruled.
No.
How do you get from Piper Tech serology to the Parker Center? How did you get there on June 14th in this case?
Via a car.
Government car?
Yeah, the city car.
And will you describe how you transported the rack with the tubes?
Well, the closed-off tubes are in the rack, and then one of those Kim wipes I described earlier, there's larger versions. I'll wrap that whole rack and everything up in the Kim wipe and transport it that way.
Why did you put the Kim wipe on?
Well, mostly because when you're walking around the police station, it makes detectives and people over there kind of nervous if they see little test tube things. So I just want to make sure it's covered up.
Can you describe the facility or the rooms that you have over there? Are they normally staffed by anybody?
Over where?
At Parker Center?
At Parker Center, it would just be the DNA people.
Okay. And is there somebody whose assignment is to be there all the time?
No.
How is it utilized?
When we need to do amplifications, we go over there.
Is that the only function for those rooms?
Basically, yes.
Overruled.
Basically, yes.
Yes.
Okay. Do you know whether or not it's routinely kept locked?
Objection,
Overruled.
Yes, it is.
And where do you obtain the key?
Well, I have a key, and Aaron Riley does, and Harry Clan, because we work in that area. And
Okay.
I believe some supervisors do too. I'm
Now,
not sure.
Harry Clan, that's a new name that you haven't mentioned yet. Who is he?
I'm sorry, he's the other DNA analyst that we have.
Okay. Do you recall about what time it was, or strike that, let's just talk generally. You get over to you've got your key to the amplification area at Parker Center. Will you describe what's shown in the photograph on the left-hand side? It's labeled pre-amplification. What are you doing there?
This is a room that's separated from the amplification room. The amplification room is the one with the instrument, the thermocycler. And in this pre-amplification area is where we set the tubes up, process them with the right chemicals to be taken over and placed into the machine.
How many different rooms are there in the amplification area at Parker Center?
We have 4 rooms in that area.
And you've described pre-amplification. Is that the same room as the amplification takes place?
No, it's not.
Okay, so the photo on the left-hand side shows what you've just described, and that's in one room. And then the next photo is labeled amplification. What's going on in that photograph?
That's where the actual amplification process takes place. That's where the thermocycling machine is housed in that room.
And at this point in the process, are there additional controls that are added to the controls that you described in the extraction process?
Well, those would be set up over here, but yes, there are. For the amplification process, we have another positive and negative control.
And what is their function?
Well, like I was saying before, we have that controls that we take at the scene. We've got controls at that extraction point. We also have another set of controls at this point where we're going to run the amplification, just to give us more information again.
Okay, what's shown in the next photo on the right, the hybridization, or the one that's labeled hybridization, what are you doing there?
See, that's to display the hybridization strips that we have. And those are the strips that contain the probes that we eventually get our results from.
Okay, and this is all the commercially available product?
Yes, it is.
Okay, and photography, what does that photograph on the right-hand show?
Okay, at Parker Center, after we do the strips, we've got the photograph then, and that's the area over there at Parker Center that we do that.
What are you actually taking photographs of?
The strips themselves.
Okay, and then what do you do with the strips?
Well, we throw the strips away after we're done.
Why is that?
Well, because the strips themselves, they'll tend to discolor, and they won't be as good as that original photograph if you hold on to them. So we have no reason to keep them.
Okay. Now, at this point, generally speaking, as you do the procedure in the Los Angeles Police Department, you've got photographs of the strips, and the board has another line entitled PiperTech Product Gel Electrophoresis. Can you describe what's in the left-hand photo, the picture of those doors?
That's the room at PiperTech where we perform the product gels.
What is the name of that room,
It's the instrument room.
and where is that in relation to serology?
It would be separated from it by walls, but it's kind of like right next to it.
They're adjacent to one another,
Yes,
but separate rooms?
yes.
And is there some sort of security device that monitors people coming in and out of the instrument room?
Yes, we also have to use those access cards for that.
Now, what do you need to take from the Parker Center at the end of the amplification and hybridization back to PiperTech to take into the instrument room? What are you actually taking back there?
I have to take some of the amplified product from this reaction that's held in the thermal cycler, and that has to be brought back to PiperTech to be analyzed in this product gel.
And what's the purpose of the product gel?
It's to kind of tell you whether or not the amplification process took place, and it can also give you more information as to a relative idea of how much DNA was formed by the amplification, although that's not real accurate.
Now, a little while ago, you mentioned that it was important to avoid PCR product carryover to keep the amplification separate from other areas. It's foundation. Yeah. Do you recall discussing that a little while ago?
Yes.
Does bringing the PCR product back into the instrument room violate that?
No, the reason why we have it in the instrument room is because it's separated physically from serology, where we do our extractions.
Are you familiar with other laboratories where all of these functions are done within the same building but in different rooms?
That sounds reasonable, yes.
Okay. And what do you end up with at the end of the product gel electrophoresis?
You wind up with electrophoresis gel where the product is moved through an electrical field, and so it can be visualized and noted.
Okay, we can take the board down. Do you want to have a seat again? Oh, sure. Now, this board doesn't actually reflect everything in the same position and location as it was when you performed your tests on June 14th and June 15th, does it?
Well, this work area right here
The product
was
gel.
changed. We were on a bench area that was kind of around the corner from that at the time that I actually analyzed evidence in the Simpson case. But since then, we've had to move our stuff over to the other corner.
Same room?
Yes, same room.
How many feet apart?
now 10, 15 feet or so.
Okay.
Is it the same equipment?
Yes, the equipment's the same.
Okay. You can have a seat again, Mr. Yamauchi. Now, you've described the samples that you that you sampled and that you extracted. Did you subject them to the PCR DQ alpha testing process in the manner that, in the general manner and sequence that is shown on Exhibit 281, the photo display board?
Yes.
Okay, and if you can, I'd like you to break down the process and ask you about how long each step took, if that's possible to do. For example, how long did the Kelex extraction process take you on June 14th for the samples that you've described to this jury?
As in any casework sample or situation, it's about an hour and a half.
Okay, and then from the extraction process, did you go right over to Parker Center after that?
Overruled.
Well, I don't know when I had my lunch that day, but that would have been the next step. Eventually, I would have had to drive over there.
And you processed them, amplification, hybridization, and photography in the manner that's shown on the photo board 281 for identification?
Overruled.
Yes.
Okay. And did you obtain PCR DQ alpha results on samples that are in the list of samples that you've previously described to the jury?
Yes, I analyzed those samples.
Okay. Could we have the...
Matter that we have to approach on just prior to.
With the court reporter, please. Mr. Blazier, let me see you without the court reporter, please. Thank you, counsel. Proceed.
Thank you, Your Honor. Mr. Yamauchi, could you step down here for a second? Okay, I wanted to start out by describing some of the results you obtained. Mr. Yamauchi, you have described 4 separate stains from the glove, 9A, B, C, and D, which you subjected to the PCR DQ alpha process. Is that correct?
Yes.
How many of those stains or cuttings produced results in this case?
I have to check my notes.
Sure.
And Mr. Yamaguchi, could you keep your voice up, please? Thank you.
Two of the stains,
And which two did not produce results?
A and B.
And were these were two of the leather cuttings?
Yes.
And did that surprise you, given what you've talked about in terms of leather inhibiting the PCR process?
Sustain. Raise question.
Sure. You mentioned something earlier about leather inhibiting the PCR process.
Yes.
What was that?
Leather is known to inhibit the amplification part of the PCR process. So, to answer your question, didn't surprise me.
Okay. And have you read, is that mentioned, I think, in the user guide that
Or will? Is that
I'm not-
mentioned in the user guide?
I'm sorry?
Is that mentioned in the user guide?
I'm not sure if I know if it's in the user guide, but it is in other literature.
Okay. What about 9C? What PCR DQ alpha results were obtained on 9C, the sample?
The results I obtained on that item, 1.1, 1.3, 4, with a possible 1.2.
Okay. And 9D, what result did you obtain from 9D?
1.1, 1.3, 4, possible 1.2.
Okay, could you, if you would, use the pointer and to the best of your ability, I know you didn't take these pictures, could you get the pointer, Mr. Yamaguchi, and show us the area on the glove where 9C was removed from?
I'm going to have to refer to my notes.
Sure, would that help?
Yes.
You realize the top two photos show the glove inside out, and then the bottom photo shows the palm side of the glove on the outside.
Yes, okay. The 9C was taken somewhere in this area.
Okay, you're pointing to the general area. Could you point there again? I don't want you.
Somewhere around here.
The notch area?
Wrist area, yeah.
Okay, and you pointed to an area a little distance away from G13.
Yeah, approximately.
Okay, and then where was 9D taken from?
That would actually be on the other side of the glove.
On the back,
Yeah, the back side,
on the outside or inside?
on the outside.
Was 9C taken from the inside or the outside?
That was the inside liner.
So it was the inside liner,
Yes.
in the back of the hand?
For 9C, 9C was the inside liner. 9D was on the back of the glove, around that area.
Okay, well, let's go back to 9C. Was it the back of the hand? If my hand, my right hand was in a glove, would the surface touching my hand that you got 9C from, would that be on the back of my hand or on the palm side of my hand?
I believe back.
Okay, and then 9D was from where?
If you were to turn this glove around, it would be along this edge here, somewhere in that area.
Along the, why don't you show on my hand where that was?
Somewhere around here.
Okay, I'm not sure what this is called. I know there's a medical term for it, but right here.
Isn't that the heel?
Okay.
Well, jury got the idea, so.
Okay. If you would, I'm not sure if you could reach it, could you remove from the result board 272A the cover over PCR results? Can you reach it?
No. Need somebody tall. Mr. Neufeld.
Okay, and at the time, I know ultimately you were provided reference samples in this case, but at the time of this first run, you did not have reference samples from Nicole Brown and Ronald Goldman, is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
But ultimately, you did process them the next day?
Yes.
Okay, and are the types that are shown up on the board, the DQ alpha types for Mr. Simpson, who was running this first set of runs, and Nicole Brown and Ronald Goldman, the DQ alpha results up in the top there, are those consistent with the results that you obtained on the samples that were provided to you?
I'll stipulate to it.
Is that stipulation acceptable to the people?
Yes, Your Honor.
All right.
We'll stipulate that those are the results that he obtained.
Yes.
Okay, that's fine.
Thank you, gentlemen.
Okay, could you remove under the not excluded column, the sort, from among the three reference types that you typed in this case, whom you were unable to exclude from the results that you obtained on 9C and 9D? Okay, is that correct, that you were not able to exclude either Nicole Brown or Mr. Goldman or Mr. Simpson from those tests?
As a possible mixture in conjunction with those results.
Okay, now, is there some question about the possible 1.2 as it relates to Mr. Simpson? That
Well, we really can't make a statement once a mixture's present, whether
Right.
that's there or not.
Okay, and had you done additional typing, might you have been able to make a better statement than...
Objection, Your Honor.
Sustain, rephrase the question.
I'll just move on, Your Honor, that's fine.
I move to strike that and...
No, juries
As
disregard the
construction.
implication of any of that question. Proceed.
Get the Bundy photo board and the Bundy result board, Peoples 165 and 259, Your Honor?
Yes.
I'm going to direct your attention to the results you obtained from item 48, which was photo ID number 113. Did you obtain a result on item 48?
Yes, I did.
And what result did you produce in your PCR DQ alpha typing?
1.1, 1.2.
Okay. Your Honor, with the court's permission, I'd like to, I've got a cover that could you put this over the DQ alpha results that are on 48? Sure, just cover over, there you go, right there. So the record can be clear what Mr. Yamauchi just did, Your Honor. He placed a cover over the DOJ DQ alpha D1S80 results that reflect his DQ alpha results.
Yes. It being a magnetic removable strip.
It's a. Can I make a suggestion, Your Honor? If he moves the strip to the right, I think you can see everything.
Well, it's his presentation.
Okay, so, Mr. Yamauchi, if our board's correct, you... Okay, you're now voted. So I'm putting it to the right of the DOJ DQ alpha 1112 results. So if our board is correct, did you get the same results on DQ alpha that DOJ did?
Yes.
And did you get the same results in DQ alpha, if our board is correct, that Cellmark did on stain 48, photo item 113?
Yes.
Okay, in addition to processing 48, did you also process the 48 substrate control through the entire PCR DQ alpha process?
Objection leading.
Overruled.
Overruled.
Yes, I did.
And what results did you obtain?
That came out negative.
No typing results?
Right.
I'd like to, just for the record, Your Honor, I've skipped 47 until tomorrow.
Proceed.
49, did you obtain any typing results from stain number 49, which is identified as photo ID number 114?
No, I did not.
And when you say you got no results, can you provide any sort of explanation for that?
Objection closed with speculation resulting.
Rephrase the question.
Sure. Was there anything in your, strike that, I'll move on. So no typing results in 49.
No typing results.
Did you process 49 substrate control through the entire process?
Yes, I did.
Did you obtain any results?
No, I did not.
And so there was no typing activity in 49 substrate control?
No.
Did you obtain a result on item 50 from the walkway at Bundy?
Yes, I did.
That's photo ID number 115.
Yes.
What results did you obtain through the PCR DQ alpha marker?
On number 50, I got 1.1, 1.2.
Okay, would you place this cover to the right of the DOJ DQ alpha results? And if our board is correct, you got the same results as DOJ and Cellmark did in the processing of that stain?
Yes.
Okay, did you process the 50 substrate control through the entire process just as you did the others?
Yes, I did.
And did you produce any typing results for the substrate control for item 50?
No.
Did you obtain any results for item 52, that one that had the kind of the pinkish substrate control that you described earlier?
Yes, I did.
That was photo ID number 117.
Yes.
Okay, what results did you obtain from item 52 that was out in the driveway?
1.1, 1.2.
Okay, would you put this cover up to the right of the DOJ DQ alpha results? You got the same DQ alpha result that Cellmark and DOJ did from those stains?
Yes, I did.
Did you process the substrate control, the pinkish one that you've described?
Yes.
And what results did you obtain on the substrate control?
No results.
Item 41, that was, I believe you described it earlier as a potential reference sample from Ronald Goldman. You recall that description? And based on what Dennis Fung told you?
Yes.
Okay, and did you obtain any results from item 41?
No results.
Did you obtain any results from item 41C, the substrate control?
No.
Do you recall how long it took to do the PCR process from start to finish? When I say start, I mean from the time that you got to serology to begin the extraction process until the time you completed your tests that you just described to the jury.
Per night, each,
No, the length of time from start to finish.
we're talking about each set, because I did do 2 days worth.
Sure. I'm sorry, June 14th. I mean the ones we've just presented to the jury.
Okay. Well, it took pretty much the morning, the day, and into the early evening.
Okay. And at some point, did you communicate the results of your testing to Greg Matheson?
Yeah, that evening,
How did you do that?
by telephone.
Do you remember about what time that you finished or you left work that night?
I'm thinking around 8 or so. Might have been later.
Okay. I can go on with a few other things, but this might, you want me to keep going? Okay.
Let's use the time.
Now, Mr. Yamauchi, we have already, the jury's already seen some of the notes that you compiled as a result of your work in this first series of DQ alpha runs. Could you just briefly describe, they've seen some of the processing notes, but what sorts of notes and logs do you keep with respect to the DQ alpha processing? If you just start at the beginning and give us the titles of the reports and what their function is.
Oh, you mean like the DNA extraction record?
Sure.
Okay, that would be one of the sheets we'd start out with.
And what
then-
sorts of information is recorded on there?
We would record something to the effect of an item number or some identifying number, as well as the extraction number and the chronological order that that's associated with.
What's the next record that you keep in the sequence of events?
Well, then we would have the amplification record.
What does that record?
That records what samples are being amplified.
And are there numbers assigned to in some point in the process?
Yes, the amplification record has an amplification number and the chronological order corresponding to each of the sample tubes.
And are you actually looking at the sheet for this first run right now?
Yes.
What number was assigned to the series of samples that you processed?
It's amplification